Part 2. Right and Wrong. 181. Post-treaty. A girl screamed. Horth was on his feet in a bound and standing in the half-light of the bedroom. A skinny boy of 10 with an adult's self-possession, naked from the waist up. He froze to listen. "What is it?" asked Branst from the next bed. "Is it Mother?" Horth listened harder. He was sure the scream had not been Mother's, even though it had come from the room she shared with Father, and no female Nersalian would scream that way, which meant it was probably a servant. But Mother never tolerated servants near her. She was especially loath to mix with the non-eternals now that she was pregnant again, because she was certain she had lost the child for unnatural reasons, and after 5 miscarriages in 6 years, even Father was beginning to doubt so much bad luck could be natural. Branst got out of bed, wrestling the covers. At 13, he had a man's body topped with tousled black hair, but was filling out in comely rather than imposing proportions, unlike Zrenal, whose physique resembled Father's. Branst was dressed in brown and green pajamas. He wore the same pajamas every night because they were a gift from Tessitat. The two brothers stood in silence for a moment, but there were no new sounds. It was Horth who decided to go into family hall. Branst followed. Mother's retainer, Lywolf, came charging out of the nursery fully dressed with a sword in his hand. He had almost reached their parents' door when Hara and 2 of her errands burst out of the throat. Hara put herself in Lywolf's way, flanked by a male errant named Rawson and a woman named Gil. For a moment, neither Lywolf nor Hara spoke. There were no shared rules of engagement. Hara was a non-eternal from the Nesak point of view, but beneath notice. From the court perspective, she and Lywolf failed to share the challenge class, but as a superior Sevolite it was in his power to condescend to fight with her if he wanted to. "So be it, soulless one," the Nesak said through clenched teeth when he could stand no more. "I will honor you with a quick death if I must, but I am going through that door." "Forget it, Nesak," Hara growled. "I am under no obligation to duel just because it suits you to acknowledge me now." Just then, the door opened with a bang and Alice, the maid, burst through the bedroom door sobbing hysterically, although she appeared to be unharmed. Branst cried, "Alice!" and bolted after the commoner as she disappeared into the servants' passage. Lywolf seized the opportunity to charge Rawson, who happened to be standing nearest to the door, slashing at Hara's head to hold her off. Hara just managed to draw 2/3 of her sword out of her scabbard in the cramped quarters and raised it half above her head in an angled prime parry, causing Lywolf's blade to scrape down it and bite into her shoulder. Rawson slammed against the wall, but his partner, Gil, reacted with relish-fast reflexes, darting in to run Lywolf through from the side as he engaged Hara. Horth witnessed the fight with a deep sense of shock. This was no duel. It was a life-and-death struggle played out with swords because they were the weapons available. He never forgot the difference, and he quickly decided that Lywolf was a fool to take on lesser Sevolites 3-1 in circumstances that nullified the advantages of being highborn. Hara hissed in pain, gripping her shoulder, but the bottom 2/3 of a dueling sword was not sharp and she was not badly injured. Lywolf himself was down, bubbling out frothy blood from a punctured lung. "Get him out of sight," Hara ordered her errands. "Now!" Horth met Hara's eyes with questions. She only frowned. Gil sheathed her sword and Rawson staggered up to help her take hold of the wounded man. Lywolf tried to get up and they shoved him down, forcing a moan from the Nesak as he labored to breathe through his blood. "Hara, are you out there?" Hangst Nersal called from the bedroom. "Coming, my liege," Hara replied and dodged inside. She reappeared, supporting the family's Guerrero Pole medic, Naris, whose face was slashed above one eye. Like all Guerrero Pole, Naris did not react to pain like other people. It was merely information to him. But he looked more bad-tempered than usual, and the whole side of his face was slick with fresh blood. 16-year-old Zrenal emerged from his bedroom belatedly. "What happened?" he demanded imperiously of Hara. "Your mother happened," snapped Hara, her respect for Zrenal's High Lord birth rank restricted to her choice of pronouns. "She attacked Naris and terrified a servant with that Nesak knife she keeps by her bed. She is losing her baby again and decided to take it out on the people your father asked to help her." Zrenal looked big and solid even in his dressing gown. Such presence should amount to something, Horth felt, but his eldest brother only grimaced, flexed his fists, and strode off. He called back to anyone who bothered to take notice. "I'll be working at the docks." It was part of an emerging pattern. When things got rough at home, Brance chased women and Zrenal went to the docks. It felt as if the family were under siege and splintering under the pressure. Kimpstan challenged Father every year, while at the same time a dark and brooding sympathy for Mother built up around the suspicion that something as wicked as Lorel evil lurked at the root of her inability to give birth to a living child. Zrenal was constantly in fistfights or arranging first-blood duels with one faction or another before he took to the fleet for refuge. He had been shirking his duty as heir Nursal ever since. He even failed to attend Father's last title duel, which was a serious omission because only Liege Nursal's named heir had the right to reciprocate immediately if Hangst lost. The alternative was to accept the victor as the Liege of Nursal for at least a 3-day period of respite, and Mother was certain that would be the end of her and her sons. Father didn't think so, and Brance thought Father was right, but the point was Zrenal ought to attend. "Why, Keen, why?" Mother's voice pierced the door of her bedroom. "Why won't you come back? Why do you keep dying?" Father's voice answered, speaking too softly to be heard, but sounding calm and reasonable. Gil and Rawson reached the nursery and paused to lay Lywolf down while Gil went to open the door. In another moment, Lywolf would disappear inside and probably die. Heart hammering, Horth stepped up in front of Naris and Hara. "Wounded," he said, and pointed with a stiff arm. "Yes, I'm wounded," Naris snapped. "Thanks to your Nessak mother. May the gods take an interest in her." Wishing the perverse attentions of Earth's dimly remembered, sadistically mad god and his mother reaffirmed Horth's bad opinion of Naris. But he didn't have time to register his complaint on that front. Horth pointed down the hall again where Rawson was dragging Lywolf's feet through the nursery doors. "Him," Horth said in Rel peerage, since Lywolf addressed him like that. "What's the reject talking about?" Naris asked Hara. "Gil skewered Barrel's henchman when he tried to get past us," she admitted to the Guerrero pole, with an uncomfortable glance in Horth's direction. "Should have crippled him, not gone for the torso. Hanks isn't going to be pleased about it." "Wonderful," Naris said tartly. "All right, I'll see if the Nessak is salvageable." Still dabbing his bleeding eyebrow, the Guerrero pole stumbled off towards the nursery. Horth's heart rate slowed. He knew Naris was good at his job. He did not like him one iota more because of it, however. The sour-faced old commoner objected to Horth taking pieces of his equipment to examine. Once, he told Horth not to do it again, or he would take out his liver and replace it with an artificial organ that only he knew how to keep alive, the way that the Lorels had done in times leading up to the Fifth Civil War. Horth did not like the things that Naris told Father about his verbal limitations either. The Guerrero pole made it sound as if there was something wrong with Horth's brain. He preferred Mother's belief that brains didn't matter, as long as one's soul was strong. "I want Zer Sarn," Mother's voice wailed through the door. "I want my priest." Hank's voice rumbled back at her, telling her again how Nessak priests did not belong on Gilean and his household could be trusted not to poison her. "Princess Beryl cries like a Demish girl," Hara said contemptuously. Horth looked at Hara, hoping she might say more, but she only stayed a moment before heading for the nursery where Naris had disappeared, leaving Horth standing alone at his parents' door. Horth decided to go and find Brance. Alice's rooms near the kitchens was well known to Horth because Alice was a special friend who always did Brance's chores. Her door was ajar. Horth let himself in without bothering to knock, and halted at the sight of Brance leaning over Alice on her bed. She was lying down with her shoes kicked off. Her legs, clad in the black slacks that were part of her uniform, were all that was visible of her except for her arms that were clasped around Brance's neck. He was kissing Alice, one hand probing under her clothing. Horth took a step back and shut the door. He knew what he had seen. It was impossible not to know a lot about sex, growing up in a Vrelish household. The Arents indulged with each other, brought in commoner prostitutes, and talked about it a lot. But they were Arents. Branced was Branced, and Mother said having sex with a commoner was like breeding with an animal. Father wouldn't approve either, for Vrelish reasons. At least, Horth was pretty sure Alice hadn't done anything worthy of earning a gift child from Branston or Sal, which would make her the mother of a nobleborn and be a way for her to gain status. Horth suspected Branst shouldn't be doing what he was doing with Alice, but he wasn't entirely sure. He decided that Zrenel would know more, because he had been trying to find a woman who would give him a freedom price so he could start flying combat as a Rel Shah. Zrenel's problem was that mother and father could not agree on how that should work, marriage or child gifting. Horth had heard them arguing about it on more than one occasion. Therefore, he reasoned, Zrenel ought to know all about fertility matters. But as Horth was dressing for his expedition to find Zrenel, the Black Hearth Herald stuck his head into the room to interrupt. "Excuse me, Master Horth," said the herald, expressing his respects through the case and suffixes applied to each pronoun as was usual in Gilak. "Your father is not to be disturbed, and I cannot find either of your brothers, but Liege Monitum is waiting at the entrance hall. Will you see him on your father's behalf?" Horth accepted the job and followed the herald down the throat. It wasn't until Horth saw Daimon, properly dressed with his dueling sword strapped to his right hip, that he realized he was ill-prepared to greet a highborn visitor. A Civilite should always wear a sword in order to express respect for sword law. Even worse, from Horth's prepubescent perspective, his lack of an honorable weapon was a tacit admission that he was still a child. "Horth," Daimon acknowledged him. "Are neither of your brothers at home, then?" Horth shrugged, unwilling to discuss what Branst was up to. Daimon's Goreral Pull, Sarillis, was carrying her medical bag with the snakes on it, coiling around a narrow cross. Horth noted the silver star on her arm that showed through a gauze patch on the sleeve of her green smock. The stick with the snakes was a Lorel symbol. The mark on her arm meant she had been trained on Touchgate, the hospital station that the Lorvrelish exiles still ran. "I'm here to offer help, if it is wanted." Horth was sure his mother would not want Monatee's help, but was afraid she needed it. He hesitated for only a moment, then led the way down the throat to the door of his parents' bedroom. Daimon and Sarillis followed. A cry of pain stabbed through the door as they arrived. Daimon lowered the hand he had raised to the door's heavy handle and turned to his Goreral Pull instead. "How many miscarriages is this since the duel with Keen?" he asked her as if Horth was not there. "The 6th?" He shook his head. "It doesn't seem likely this is natural." "Statistically, no," Sarillis told her master. "But it isn't impossible either. Hangst is 46% Civilite, and Beryl is just barely a royal blood at 50%. That puts their offspring in the range where the risk of straddling the highborn and nobleborn phenotypes is high. Spontaneous abortions are common in that range because a fetus with only some highborn traits isn't viable." "Why?" Horth blurted. Both visitors blinked at him. Without adapting her style to her audience, Sarillis answered. "Highborn syndrome requires a gestalt of interlocking systems. Say, for example, a fetus had regenerating powers but not the regulating mechanism that prevents regenerative cancer. Or perhaps the fetus is Vrelish enough for the stress response syndrome called Relosh, but lacks those regenerative powers. There are at least a dozen fatal combinations in offspring, more than 1/3, but less than 1/2 Civilite." "Mother is all Civilite," Horth told the Goreral Pull with snakes on her bags. Sarillis showed impatience. "No, she isn't. She is highborn, yes, but only about 50% Civilite. Whether she and the rest of the Nessacs wish to acknowledge it, anyone less than a pure-blood Civilite makes up the difference with ordinary human DNA, commoner DNA, just like mine." "Sarillis," Daimon cautioned gently. "Facts are facts," said the old Goreral Pull. "Nessacs can't change them with superstitious dogma." Horth frowned. If Mother said she was all Civilite, he found that should settle the matter. But Sarillis was talking about numbers, not souls. He let it drop, for now. "Horth," said Daimon, "I want to see your mother. I wish to try to reason with her. Will you show us in?" Horth weighed his own faith in Daimon's honor against the nefarious influence of his Lorel connections. He was spared a decision by his father calling out, "Hara, is that you?" Daimon opened the door himself. Inside, the master bedroom was softly lighted. It smelled of birth and blood. Hengst Nersal's big form was stretched on the bed beside Beryl, who lay curled up against him, limp with exhaustion between her convulsions. Hengst sat up as the visitors came into the room, reaching automatically for the sword on a bedside table. "What do you want, Monitum?" he asked in his deep voice as he rose. Daimon stiffened. "Monitum, is it? Shall I call you Nersal, then?" he asked. Father gave his attention to fastening his sword belt around his waist. Daimon waited. "I appreciate you coming," Father told Daimon when he had the sword belt fastened. "But Beryl assures me that she would rather die than be treated by any Guerrero Pull." Father said this with pride, as well as frustration. "I understand," Daimon answered in a neutral tone. "But you suspect something. It is therefore in my interest, at least as much as yours, that those suspicions be proved or disproved. I am not poisoning your Nesak wife," Daimon said firmly, and added with more kindness. "If someone is, let me prove it, or else prove her loss is natural." Beryl stirred on the bed, reaching out blindly with one groping hand. "Nersal? Where are you, Nersal?" Father retreated to the bed. "Here," he said, sitting down to take her hand. "Who's there?" Beryl asked distractedly. "Zersarn?" "She's delirious," said Cyrillus in a cool tone. "I suspect an infection." "No, it is not Zersarn, Beryl," said Father, crouching down awkwardly because of the sword he now wore. "There is no priest of your people on Gilion. It is my friend Daimon, Liege Monitum, and his Guerrero Pull." Mother voiced a short gasp of alarm that drew Horth to her bedside. Beryl put her hand over Horth's. Her skin felt hot and damp. A tangled mass of black hair framed her white face. Sweat soaked her brow and her eyes looked hollow. "Perhaps it is enough," she said, stroking Horth's hand. "Perhaps my work here is done, and it is time to go." Horth's throat constricted and his heart beat faster, making him feel dizzy. He didn't like Mother talking like that. "Liege Monitum wants to take a blood sample," Father persisted. "He wants to test for drugs that might have caused you to lose this child, or sickness that might be responsible." "No," Mother gasped. "Beryl," Father tried to argue. "No." She shrank away from Father, letting go of Horth, her whole body trembling. Father rose again to face Daimon. "I won't force her." "Have you done any tests yourself?" Daimon asked. Father looked away, troubled. His jaw worked. Mother stared out of her large eyes at him like someone waiting for her own execution. "I gave samples to my own Guerrero Pull on other occasions, yes," Father said, adding quickly, "samples of spilled blood." "You found nothing?" Cyrillus asked. Father shook his head, lips compressed to a thin line. He didn't seem like the man Horth knew from quiet hours spent together. He felt like a liege of Fountain Court conferring with another liege on business matters. "No!" Beryl wailed, her will lashing out from her tortured body. "Not you, not—" She clawed at Horth's arm. "Horth, my spirit knife! Give me a weapon!" But the knife was not in the place that it usually was on her dresser. Father must have taken it after she slashed Naris. "Beryl, stop this," Hengst commanded, capturing her arms to pull her close against him. "I did nothing to harm you." Her hands locked in his forearms. Tangled hair hung in damp coils on either side of her bright green eyes as she looked up at Hengst. "Can't trust anyone," she gasped. "Not even my love." "No, Beryl, I haven't lied," Father told her. "I never extracted blood from you, and I won't test stained sheets again either. Not without your consent, I promise. But you must stop this." Hengst squeezed her arms, almost shaking her, and then gathered her against his broad chest as another convulsive spasm struck her. Over his shoulder, Hengst ordered Horth, "Get them out of here." The visitors offered no resistance, but they did not go far. They stopped in the first room of the throat, known as Family Lounge. As Horth had taken it as his duty to escort them out, he halted as well to wait for them to move on. Cyrillus wore a sneer of contempt. Next, she will be having visions that tell her you are Dansir Monitum of the 5th Civil War reborn, she grumbled to her master, and insist you be publicly eviscerated for your crimes. Cyrillus, Daimon said, that's not helpful. Horth knew Daimon was always careful to make his corrective remarks to his Guerrero Pol in the form of mere statements, not orders. Tessitat said this was because a direct command left Cyrillus no scope for defending her point of view, and Daimon valued her most for her willingness to give him an argument. Horth felt that was honorable, since to disobey a bondmaster's command was fatal to a bonded Guerrero Pol. And yet, bonding itself was a Laurel science and felt like something people shouldn't do. Maybe it was all right because Guerrero Pol were commoners who had to be controlled. Horth wasn't sure. What do you make of the tests that Hank spoke about? Daimon asked Cyrillus, once again acting as if he had forgotten Horth was present. Does it remove suspicion? As medics, Nersalians make good engineers, Cyrillus said with a sneer. I doubt it was competently executed. But they are good technicians, said Daimon. For routine things, I suppose. But the people with the most motivation to sabotage Beryl Nessak's breeding plans are people with access to more than routine resources. I suppose you mean the Kimpf Stan, said Daimon, and frowned. That would not be like them. If they object to Hank's deal with the Nessaks, they can take it up by the sword, and have. Yes, said Cyrillus. And they haven't done so well thus far. Honor may tire in the face of so much failure on the challenge floor. It took Horth a moment to grasp she was insulting the honor of his entire house by implying that the Kimpf Stan might be poisoning his mother. Without thinking, he struck out to punish her, and would have connected hard enough to do her frail body serious harm if his attack had not been deflected by Daimon's right arm. The next moment, Horth's access to the Guerrero Pol was blocked by Daimon's drawn sword. I believe that young Horth here understood more than you thought he would, Cyrillus, said the wily liege of Monitum, holding Horth's stare with his slate-gray eyes. Apologize to him. He did not prevaricate now. It was an order. Cyrillus bowed in Horth's direction. Your pardon, High Lord Horth, scion of Black Hearth, said the Guerrero Pol. My conjecture was merely hypothetical. I accuse no actual member of the Kimpf Stan of dishonorably injuring your mother in defiance of your father's dual pact with House Nessak. Horth glared at her over Daimon's drawn sword, unimpressed by the long, sonorous flow of the words that came out of her face. He felt no retraction in her tone. My apology as well, Daimon said as he sheathed his sword. You speak so seldom, Horth. It is easy to forget that you can understand. Then he smiled. Or that you are growing up, he added. It is going to go fast from here on. You are more relished than your brothers, if I'm any judge. Liege Monitum! A familiar voice intruded. Daimon closed his eyes very briefly as Branst rushed over, his clothes still disheveled from his tryst with Alice. Good cycle, Branst, Daimon greeted him civilly. See me out, will you? My visit here is done. Is Tessitat with you? Branst asked. Alas, Daimon said with a strained patience. No. Horth listened to Branst trying to ingratiate himself with Daimon until the conversation was cut off by the door at the far end of the family lounge. Doubly determined to go seize Rennell, Horth went to fetch a sword. His own was a child's, so on impulse he took one of Brandt's and slung it down his back because it was too long for him to wear. He picked a traveling cloak without identifying marks and headed down the throat of Black Hearth, the borrowed sword bouncing on his back and the borrowed cloak dragging on the floor. Where are you going, my scrawny one? Hara intercepted him before he reached the spiral stairs that led up to the plaza. Armed and all. Horth scowled. Docks, he told Hara. 'Tis Rennell. Not like that, you aren't, she said. At least, not alone. Hara laughed at the serious expression. I'll take you to find your Nessak brother. I could use the walk, but, she frowned, leave the sword behind and take that traveling cloak off. Nasty, sneaky habit going about under Gelion like that. And foolish, besides. It is safer to show our dragons. We're in Assalian. People will not lightly mess with us. Besides, that thing will trip you. Horth shrugged out of the cloak and let it fall to the floor. Some servant, like Alice, would take care of returning it to Brant's closet. He was more reluctant to part with his sword, but when Hara refused to budge, he took that off too and laid it down. The watch captain began to greet Horth as he emerged, then broke off to salute Hara with the traditional fist-to-heart gesture used by all Nersalians. A Nersalian salute was the net result of an on-the-spot calculation that took account of birth ranks, titles, oaths, and attitudes, culminating in a promise to support the one saluted should a conflict arise. That was useful, because people were always struggling over status or deciding how to assert their own desires, and the watch captain had just told Horth, without any pointed insult, that he ranked second to Hara under the circumstances. Horth expected nothing else, but it still rankled him in a way that was new to him since he had turned 10. He wanted to be the one people saluted, but he knew he had to earn the privilege. People respected Hara because she was captain of errants. Horth was a hearthson with no special status apart from his birth rank, routinely acknowledged through pronouns, which entitled him to highborn rights of challenge, including his membership in the Kimp Stan. But birthrights conferred no honors beyond that. Horth would have to prove himself in the world. Once out of Black Pavilion, Hara led Horth through the bazaar of goods and services on the plaza. Next, they passed through the tall arch of the palace shell with its rings of balconies for access to the palace, differentiated by birth rank. It was possible to see a lot of Undergelion from the promenade that ran the length of the highborn docks. The city was encased in a hull-steel dome beneath the planet's crust. Without artificial light, everything around them would be pitch black. But being closed in did not bother Horth. He had visited the Nersalian planet of Tark in Alliance Reach, and knew all about how suns created day and night on green worlds. Watching the whole performance from space made that obvious. But he distrusted weather, and disliked the things in the air on a green world that irritated his nose. Engineered environments felt comfortable. Horth and Hara threaded their way through the pedestrian traffic on the promenade, drawing no more than the occasional second look from other sword-carrying Sevelites. The ratio of Demish to Vrelish pedestrians was roughly 100-1, if you included the Vrelish nobleborns from Spiral Hall. It was much worse if you counted only Vrelish highborns. All the highborn Vrelish in sight were Nersalians. Horth also spotted nobleborns in green Monetees livery, traveling alone or in small groups with packages under their arms, books in their hands, or some servant walking beside them with an air of companionable familiarity. 3 times he had made out brightly dressed clusters of red Vrelish nobleborns from Spiral Hall playing physical jokes on one another, entwined in casual embraces, or busy passing small children back and forth between them as if the moving group of adults were a living playground. Black Gate was the farthest from the palace shell along the promenade. Hara was recognized at once and granted passage through the gatehouse. On the far side, she commandeered a car that was powered by a soundless, emission-free battery of the kind that were charged up by pilots as they flew around the universe and exchanged for spent ones at whatever dock they used. The car came with a driver whose pronouns, as he discussed their destination with Hara, declared him a petty lord, one of the birth ranks within the challenge class of those called petty Sevelites, or sometimes, less formally, simply near commoners. Hara and Horth got into the back, and they set off at a very sane pace for the military stockyard where Zrenal worked when he took himself off to the docks. Hara is a Rel woman, Horth thought, studying her in this rare moment of stillness. She had a strong face and the build of a sword fighter. Her thighs were particularly well muscled, and she had a couple of scars that Horth found fascinating because highborns, like himself and his family, did not scar. It did not occur to him that he should find her unfeminine because of any of that. He could tell by her smell that she was female, and by the contours of her chest and groin. He had been aware of the differences between male and female Nersalians for as long as he could remember. It was Demish women and commoner females like Alice whom he did not understand particularly well. In some ways, they seemed like his mother, although he knew she wouldn't like him to think of it like that. A shout drew Horth's attention to see a car pull up alongside them with a pair of Vrelish faces grinning at them from open windows. Horth's window wasn't open, but he caught taunts that went with their gestures. They were saying that Nersalians were as slow as Demish farm wagons and they were going to show them up. Even the Spiral Hall nobleborns took off with a burst of speed that made Horth wonder if they had something else besides rail batteries powering the car. Horth sat forward in his seat, feeling provoked. "Faster," he told the driver in front. "Whoa there, hotshot," Hara laughed. "And carry on, Gavin." She corrected Horth's last command. "We're not so Vrellish that we have to race bored fools just because they insulted us. I'm getting you there and— What are you doing now?" She interrupted her own lecture. Horth had noticed something out of the window and wound it down to stick his head out. He pulled his head in again and pointed back at the commotion on the Monatee's lot beside a bustling silver Demish one. There was a single Envoy-class ship parked in the taxiing area outside the Monatee's hangar that was drawing a lot of attention. The Monatees were clustering around, but they were swiftly becoming outnumbered by the people coming from the Demish yard. "Interesting," said Hara. "Might be a duel, Captain," Gavin said with ill-suppressed interest. "And it's on Monatee's property with the mob of Demish inviting themselves along." Hara nodded. "We had better take a look." Gavin made a sharp turn and sped up. He didn't hit any pedestrians, but he did weave around another car. "Park," Hara said when the traffic got thick as they approached the disturbance. Much to Gavin's disappointment, Hara ordered him to stay behind to mind their car. She and Horth jogged to the center of the ring around the main event, Hara running with one hand flat against the sheath of her sword and Horth on her other side, feeling foolish and childlike without a sword of his own. He had to admit, she was right about leaving the traveling cloaks behind, though. The Demish crowd fell back at the sight of Nersalian dragons on Horth's shirt and Hara's uniform jacket. They had no trouble getting through until they reached the solid mass of people that formed the witnessing circle around the spot where floodlights illuminated whatever they were headed for. Hara pushed her way in through a clump of petty Sevelites and commoners. Horth followed. They were met by a couple of Monatee's dock workers who approached them with the confidence of fellow Sevelites, although they were not wearing their swords and their leader addressed Hara in grammar appropriate for a commoner. "It's a Red Vrellish woman, Captain Hara," said the woman, whose name badge read Mandy. "A couple men from Silver Hearth are giving her a rough welcome to court." "Gods!" exclaimed Hara. "Red, you say? What's she doing landing on the Highborn docks if she's from Spiral Hall? Unless—" "That would be my guess, too," said the bold Monatee's commoner. "She might just belong on the Highborn docks." "And we, think she might be space drunk," said the man at Mandy's elbow. Hara set her jaw and answered their implied request for intervention with a curt nod. The Monatee's commoners called out in loud voices for people to make way for Hara, Captain of the Black Hearth Errants. Hara was swiftly reinforced by a sword-carrying Monatee's watch captain. "Black Hearth!" he exclaimed. "Glad to see you, Captain Hara. I was not sure what to do." "Back me up if necessary," Hara instructed. As the crowd parted for Hara, Horth saw an almost naked Vrellish female crouched at the center of the thickening circle of witnesses. 3 large Demish men were circling her with their swords drawn and calling out insults that entertained the increasingly Demish and primarily male crowd. "Careful, Errol, she has space eyes," one of the Demish bullies called to another. "And more than one mouth that bites," an anonymous voice piped up from the crowd. Errol raised his head to look for who had spoken, looking puzzled. "What is that supposed to mean?" he asked. His 2 partners in petty harassment erupted in laughter. "Errol's never met a really Vrellish woman," one of them gasped out between roars of laughter. The half-grown Vrellish female sprang for the man who was laughing the hardest, took him down, ripped his face with her teeth, and sprang back in possession of his sword. Space drunk or not, which was slang for impairment due to overexposure to rel skimming, the Vrellish woman knew how to use the captured sword. She blocked an attack from Errol and drew blood with a whip across the chest of the 3rd man. She could have killed another one, Horth suspected, watching her with awe. Instead, she seemed to be of the opinion that the whole row was nothing much to worry about. "Whoever she is," said Hara, "she really is space drunk, and she doesn't know a thing about Demish men." The woman followed up in her victory in an extremely Vrellish fashion. "Fighting was fun," she seemed to be trying to convey with her body language, but there were better ways to say hello and welcome to court. She clamped her thighs over the disarmed man's body and rolled him on top of her, ensuring his body stayed between her and his friends while she tested out his willingness to engage in less aggressive physical sports. The man either misunderstood or, being Demish, did not know how to decline with grace, because he reacted with a very inelegant flailing struggle and a great shout. One of his friends dove to the rescue, sword out, shouting, "Vrelish slut!" Whatever the Vrelish female's challenge class, she had tacitly consented to the fight by attacking first. The Demish men were within their rights under sword law to take her on, one by one. What tipped the balance for Horth was that 2 of them attacked her at the same time. That was wrong. But the crowd seemed to be on the men's side despite that. Or they were, until Hara cleared her sword and shouted, "All right, back off, or take me on." A murmur went through the watchers as people remembered that this was the right approach, and that keeping violence within the scope of sword law was supposed to be a witnessing circle's job. "You back off, she-man," snarled the man who had called the space-drunk woman a slut. "Make me," challenged Hara in a steely tone. The man seemed willing to oblige Hara until his friend, Errol, laid a hand on his sword arm. "Rick," he said in a low voice. "That's the captain of the Black Hearth Errants." Horth's heart soared with pride for Hara's reputation as he watched the Demish man falter. It was all the more impressive because the intimidated man was her challenge class superior. Horth wanted to stand beside her with his own sword drawn, to give her some token of highborn backup, except, of course, he didn't have a sword. While the Demish highborn named Rick deliberated, the Vrelish stranger at the heart of all the trouble tossed aside her captive and stood up. Her lean build was unencumbered by clothing except for a pair of leather flight trousers. Her breasts were not developed enough to be obvious, but the contours of her genital mound were definitely female to Horth. Her black hair was cut in irregular hanks. Her face had a shape that reminded Horth a little of the big cats of ancient Earth that he had stared at for hours in picture books that Brance brought home from Greenhearth. Another disruption in the witnessing circle disgorged Zrenal. He moved immediately to back Hara, regardless of their differences at home concerning Mother. The crowd rumbled in disappointment as the Demish trio backed off. Sword or no sword, Horth was determined to stand by Hara and his brother, and went forward to join them in the short line confronting the strange Vrelish female. Their space-drunk visitor got one good look at him, swept aside her stolen sword, and relaxed. "Horth's a Vrelish child," Hara realized. "She can see that, so she knows we are Vrelish too." "Vretla," declared the Vrelish woman, slapping her bare chest. "Vretla?" Zrenal cried, as if he'd seen a ghost. Vretla was the name of the Vrelish war hero who had defeated the Nessaks in the battle for Cold Rock. They all had the same involuntary thought. This adolescent could be Vretla Vrel, the Great, reborn. Zrenal tried to cover up his spooked reaction with a string of commands. "Hara, break up the witness circle. Tell them there won't be any duel. And you, Horth, what do you think you're doing here, you reject?" Horth reacted to the insult with a punch. Zrenal blocked, letting out an indignant "ow." Vretla Vrel laughed. "I suspect she's used to Sib fights," Hara remarked. "Horth, go take her hand and lead her back to our car." "Do you think that's safe?" Zrenal worried. "She's space-drunk." "She won't harm a child," Hara said, and smirked as Vretla proved her right by accepting Horth's guidance without a fuss. "You, on the other hand, Zrenal, are more of an age to interest her too much." "Age?" Zrenal said, sounding puzzled. Then he figured out what Hara meant and added curtly, "I am not interested in betting Vrelish savages." "Who said she'd ask you nicely?" Hara mocked his indignation as they headed off. To take the sting out of it, she added swiftly, "Thanks for backing me up there, by the way, Nersal." Zrenal grunted, but accepted the change of subject gratefully enough. "I would back up my worst enemy against a bunch of gang swords," he told Hara. Gang swords were people who bullied the unarmed, or tried to start melees for fun. "Am I your enemy, Nersal?" Hara asked. Zrenal stopped. Horth stopped as well, and turned back. Vretla let go of his hand and took a step to the side, sensing tensions. Horth noticed how she automatically positioned herself to be able to see them all at once. He also noticed the way she had said nothing more than her name so far. Hara and Zrenal stood facing each other, stares locked. "Nersal is a Vrelish house," Hara said to Zrenal. "Are you Vrelish, Nersal, or Nessak?" Zrenal held his jaw clenched and the muscles of his shoulders bunched. Hara looked relaxed by comparison. eyes hooded and her hand resting limply on the hilt of her sheathed sword. They stood like that for long seconds, the question unanswered. "I am Herr Nursal," Zrenal said at last. Hara remarked, as if the matter was entirely casual. "Then you should attend your liege's duels." Zrenal swallowed thickly and scowled. Vretla turned her head to spit blood from shimmer-strafed lungs. She wiped her mouth on the back of her bare forearm. "You can't take her back to Black Hearth," Zrenal protested, suddenly noticing that Hara was leading them towards the car. "Not like that." "Why not?" Hara asked. "Because I said so," Zrenal battered at her with his deep, angry voice. "Not now, while Mother's vulnerable." "Fine," said Hara. "I will take her to Green Hearth instead if that suits you better, Aaron or Sal." "You do that," said Zrenal. Vretla yanked Gavin out of the driver's seat to displace him. "Oh no," said Hara. "You are not driving in that condition. Horth, take her hand and coax her into the back seat with you." Horth obeyed with trepidation, and was surprised when Vretla smiled and let him guide her. "Horth," Zrenal cried, "you get out of that car." Zrenal was clearly cranky, which meant he would only rant at Horth and make no effort to be patient with him over his verbal challenges. Horth decided he would rather stay where he was and talk to Zrenal later about Branston Alice. Zrenal looked exasperated. "If anything happens to you," he threatened, "when Mother has just lost a baby—" "Vretla won't hurt the child," Hara interrupted, as she closed the front door. "Be careful," Zrenal admonished Horth in parting as Gavin pulled out. Such advice always puzzled Horth. Did Zrenal expect him to be reckless if not reminded regularly that life was dangerous? Vretla smelled of stale, sweet, fresh blood and the distinctive sex odor of a Vrelish female. She shifted over to sit close to Horth, taking in his odor and feeling the embroidery on his collar between her forefinger and thumb. "If she gives you any trouble, Hearthchild," Hara called over her shoulder from the front, "let me know." Horth knew exactly what Hara meant, but Vretla made no sexual advances. He slapped her hand to stop her fussing with his blue-black hair as if he were an infant. She chuckled her approval and responded with a playful nudge. Then she curled up on the seat to catch a quick nap. Back at Blackgate, Hara hustled Vretla out of the car and into one of the anonymous traveling cloaks she had refused for herself and Horth. But Vretla would not wear the cloak, and after the feral girl from Red Reach had shrugged it off for the second time, Hara gave up. "Fine then," Hara told her new charge. "Come as you are and get stared at." Vretla resisted only long enough to retrieve her stolen sword from the car. Then she went willingly with Horth and Hara through Blackgate and out into the Demish-dominated promenade. A pair of Demish ladies averted their eyes from Vretla's brazen nakedness, as their male escort moved to protect them, eyes popping out of his head. They were not the only pedestrians to react like that. Between the ogling bystanders and Vretla's reciprocal curiosity, their progress slowed to a crawl. One Demish man offered Vretla his cloak to cover her naked upper body. She accepted it for the sake of its silky feel, although she failed to get the idea that it was meant to cover her, and preferred swishing it around. He laughed and asked Hara, "Are Red Reach women always like this?" "She is overflown," Hara explained, and then smiled as she added, "That makes her a little indiscriminate." "Ah," he said in a good-natured manner, meaning, I suppose, that she would prefer a Vrelish peer to a Demish inferior, if she were sober. Vretla terminated the conversation by locking both hands in the man's hair and making her intentions clear with pelvic gestures that were more than either he or Hara were prepared to let her follow through with in public. The incident made Hara nervous. She hurried their charge past any males who maintained eye contact. Vretla didn't appreciate this interference with her social life much. News of their passage preceded them. They had barely reached the plaza when a party from Green Hearth arrived, including Tessitat, Branst, and a couple of errands led by Daimon. Vretla took one look at Daimon and decided that he was what she really wanted. She handed Hara her sword and went to greet Daimon with an attitude that Horth would have understood better if the dignified liege Amonitum had been a sumptuous dinner encountered after a long fast. "Wow," said Branst, staring with frank fascination. Dad says it's either fight or, well, the other thing, when extremely relish people get overflown. But I never believed him until now. Yes, but my liege uncle isn't much good at being spontaneous, Tessitat told Branst with laughter in her brown eyes. So maybe you can help us out, Branst. Make friends, so we can get her safely into Green Hearth, fast. Me? Branst blurted. Tessitat put an arm around him to help give Vretla the idea, and kissed the side of his mouth as he turned towards her. Branst quickly forgot his surprise and kissed back. That was his downfall. Vretla switched her attention from the unreceptive Daimon to the good-looking 13-year-old with his arm around another woman. Tessitat smiled to show she did not mind sharing as Vretla extended a hand to touch Branst's hair, watching Tessitat to make sure she kept looking friendly. It was Branst who flinched. She likes you, Tessitat said, with glee at Branst's discomfort. Don't be scared. I'm not scared, Branst insisted, taking a step clear of Tessitat's embrace to concentrate on Vretla. Nice, crazy, much-too-relish person, he said, patting her shoulder. She patted him back, amused. You're sure you want her in Green Hearth? Branst called to Tessitat as he coaxed her in that direction. Absolutely, Tess assured him. We know her. She's Vakal Vrel's daughter by Red Reach McCanst. Daimon wanted Vakal to send her to court to act as Liege Vrel in his place, but Red Vrelish clans are pretty fiercely matrilineal concerning children, so it wasn't up to Vretla's sire, and her maternal clan is superstitious about Lorel influences. We don't know why she's shown up now, or like this, but we're glad she's here. Unfortunately, specific memories won't regenerate along with the brain cells she's burned out, said Daimon. We'll probably never know what happened in Red Reach to prompt her to come. Vretla leaned in to nuzzle Branst. He put up with it until she put a tongue in his ear. Hey, he batted at her. Slow down. Vretla thrust a hand under Brandt's belt and got rough about expressing her intentions. Horth felt concerned for his brother, since he didn't seem to be enjoying Vretla's advances as much as he enjoyed Alice's. Horth was grateful when Daimon displaced Branst and took charge. Vretla did not seem to mind either, even though Daimon proved much better than Branst at frustrating her attempts to make an exhibition of her Vrelish lustiness in front of Demish spectators. Relieved of the hazardous job, Branst fell in step beside Tessitat. Horth noticed Tessitat take his hand and close Branst's around hers. Then Green Pavilion swallowed them. Hara stopped Horth from following with a hand on his shoulder. Your brother can take care of himself, said Hara. And if he can't, it's not as if he won't be getting an education, she chuckled. Horth stared after Branst, still worried. But on the whole, it wasn't Vretla who was the danger. It was the way that Branst and Tessitat behaved together. It seemed to Horth a lot like the way that father was with mother, except Tessitat didn't get jealous. Horth returned to Black Pavilion with Hara. They were greeted at the base of the stairs by an anxious errant. Captain, he said, grabbing Hara's arm. Liege Nersal's gone. The alarm in his face made the skin on the back of Horth's neck bristle. Liege Nersal was angry about Lywolf, explained the errant. He dismissed Gil from his service and he went for the Nessax. He let 2 of Beryl's retainers in to stay with her in the bedroom and took a 3rd one with him to the docks. He said he's gone to San Home to fetch the priest that she wants. Emotion pooled in Horth's chest, urging him to action, any action, just so long as there was something clear and obvious to do. But there were only words. Nothing but words, glancing off him, swirling around him. He decided to go fetch Branst home. Greenhearth let him in this time without an argument. He found Branst in Azir Lounge with Tessitat. They were sitting together on a couch with a tray of refreshments set down nearby on a side table. A pot of tea was set out, partnered by mismatched cups of great antiquity that had been mended often. The warm smell of chamomile rose from their cups. Tessitat finished a nut she was chewing and took a gulp from her teacup. Neither she nor Branst were wearing their swords. Tessitat stood on a floor rack and Branst lay on the floor. So, said Tessitat to Branst with the air of somebody resuming a conversation, if you weren't afraid of Vretla, why be shy? She cocked her head aside mischievously. Are you a virgin? I am not a virgin, Branst protested vehemently. But you haven't got a freedom price, said Tessitat. Neither do you, he cried. That's different, said Tessitat. We Monatees are very picky about who we breed with. And Nersalians aren't? he asked testily. Let me think, she said. The Nersalian Kimstan numbers at least 1,000, while at last count, the Monetese Kimstan numbers 3. You don't have a Kimstan, Branst protested. That word applies only to Nersalians. My point exactly. Now you aren't making any sense. That's only because you're ignorant, she told Branst. Kimstan is the Nersalian adaptation of kinfold, which is more or less an English word and used to be the general term for anyone empowered by a blood right to challenge a liege for her title. Tessitat did not actually say her. She did not say him either. She employed a common gender pronoun used in Vrelish dialect. Horth knew a bit about dialects, but the complexities of Gilak with regard to pronouns of all kinds was one of the reasons he was loath to risk talking in complete sentences. These days, of course, Tessitat concluded, the Nersalian Kimstan have usurped the whole meaning of the word, because they are the most extreme example. Branst twisted around in his seat to focus on her. I want you to have my baby, he said urgently. For 3 seconds, Tessitat kept very still. Then, she erupted into action to shove him away from her. Unlikely, she snorted. Why? Branst asked. You like me, and our families are allies, he wheedled. Tessitat folded her arms. Why should I even want the exercise, Branst Nersal? You're only 13. But you need a freedom prize too, if you're going to fly seriously, Branst said. What makes you think I don't have one already? Asked Tess. Well, he said, let's see. You haven't gone missing for months that I'm aware of. Also, no big announcements and genotyping parties. Dead giveaway. Tessitat rolled her eyes, leaned over and kissed Branst as thoroughly as Alice had earlier. When she drew back, she said, Branst, I'll sleep with you. That might be the best way to help you get over the infatuation. But I'm not having your baby. Daimon would dangle me out of an airlock for even thinking about it. Branst stiffened. But how could you... Fernie, she said, with an effort to make it sound casual. Monetees take Fernie to prevent conception. There's nothing wrong with it. And don't give me any superstitious arguments about the watching dead. You know I don't believe in that. Not literally. She looked a bit uncomfortable. My ancestors would understand anyway. Branst continued to look dismayed. Don't you worry it might... that you'll never... or... No, she said abruptly. Branst swallowed, staring at her with a look of dawning misery. Branst, Tessitat tried again. You're Kimstan. Having a child with you could mean putting House Monitum within a duel of becoming Nersalian, next generation. You want sex? Good. It's time we get this infatuation consummated. But stop being so presumptuous about it. I'm not having your baby. Branst sprang up. Come on, Horth, he said, suddenly. Let's get out of here. Branst swept up the throat of Greenhearth so swiftly Horth had to run to keep up with him. You'd think being Kimstan was like having a disease or something, Branst grumbled as they passed onto Fountain Court. I don't just want sex. I can get that on the Ava's Way with pocket money. I want to mix up our destinies. I want to be reborn Monetese. Horth gave up hope of getting Branst to talk with him about anything that day. Black Hearth kept silent vigil in the reception room beneath Black Pavilion. Errants paced or took turns playing navigational games on a portable nerve-cloth screen that was set up for the occasion. Horth watched for a while, but none of the errands would play with him. They said it wasn't fair since he was highborn. That annoyed Horth. He had enjoyed the thrill of beating his elders at nav games when he was still young enough for adult nobleborns to find it cute instead of irritating. Alice and 2 other housemaids served refreshments and circulated to see everyone was comfortable. Alice hovered near Branst. Cook declared, I'm going to bed, twice, and actually did the 3rd time. No one talked about what might be happening, or what it might mean if Father brought a Nessak priest home with him. Branst dragged a gym mat out of the nursery and dozed on the floor. Zrenal left periodically to check on Beryl. Horth circulated restlessly between his brothers and Hara, never speaking or doing much of anything, but unable to settle down. 8 hours after his departure, Father came down the spiral stairs with his sword on his hip and his face marked by the signature bruise marks of heavy rel skimming. With him came a man with Keen's black hair and green eyes, but not Keen's open, affectionate nature. The man had a hard mouth and a narrow glare. He wore no sword and was dressed in robes covered in strange symbols. Relief greeted Hank's arrival. The errants saluted. The commoners rose to their feet and bowed, the oldest one staggering with fatigue from the long vigil. Brant scrambled up off his pallet. Zrenel cried, "Father!" Horth launched himself forward. Father caught Horth up in his arms and held him up to greet the stranger. "This is Zer Sarn," he said, "Mother's priest and uncle." Hangst put Horth down again to clasp arms with Zrenel. Branst hung back, looking uncertain. "Your mother?" Father asked Zrenel. "As well as can be expected," Zrenel assured him. He turned to greet their visitor. "She will be glad to see you, Your Highness." "I go by Zer," the Nessak prince corrected Zrenel. He smiled after he said it, not before or during. "I need no other title." "Yes, Zer," said Zrenel, and lowered his head momentarily in a slow, deliberate nod, so unlike the fist-to-heart Nersalian salute in which both parties maintained eye contact. Zer Sarn's eyes rested on Branst briefly, then on Horth for a bit longer. He smiled at Horth in the same calculated way that he had smiled at Zrenel. Then he scanned the room and said, "The first thing we must do is get rid of the non-eternals." A chill swept through the room, so real Horth could have sworn that he felt the drop in temperature. The faces of the household staff lost color. Errants bristled. Alice shrank a step in Brant's direction. Zrenel looked stressed, and Branst looked angry. Branst was inhaling to explode into what Horth felt certain would be angry words when Father preempted him firmly. "This is not how we do things here," Father told the Nessak. There was a long, dreadful silence before Zer Sarn said, as coldly as if he had not just been thwarted, "Take me to your wife, Liege Nersal." The word wife made Hara turn and march out. Everyone studiously ignored her departure and kept up the pretense of normalcy, except Branst, who loudly declared that he was going over to Green Hearth to beg for a guest room. But Branst didn't say it until after Father and Zer Sarn were out of earshot. Horth went back up to an empty bedroom and lay down, wishing Branst had stayed in Blackhearth with him. Before he fell asleep, he decided that he wouldn't mind if Father had to kill this Nessak relative. 6 months later. Zrenel whipped the covers off Horth's bed. "I wouldn't wake him like that anymore," said Branst, pausing in the act of doing up the complex lacework of his formal reception jacket. Horth struck out, making Zrenel drop the stolen blanket, and sprang to his feet on the bed, man-sized and naked from the waist up. "Hey," Zrenel complained, shaking his stinging wrist. "Don't kill the messenger. It's Dad who wants us dressed for... Branst!" Zrenel broke off, pointing. "Will you look at that?" Horth's pajama pants were wet in the front. "So?" said Branst. "You've never had one of those dreams?" "But he's barely 11. Branst shrugged. "Relish highborns grow up fast, like Vretla." "Horth is not like Vretla," said Zrenel. "He's just a reject." Horth punched. Zrenel rocked back, but not quite fast enough. "Why, you brat?" Zrenel touched a bloodied lip. "If you've messed up my formal clothes..." Zrenel made a snatch in Horth's direction. Horth rolled across the bed and sprang to his feet on the other side. "You deserve a trouncing on the octagon," Horth's eldest brother threatened. Branst made a rude noise. "Yeah? By you and which visiting champion? Face it, Zrenel, Horth can beat you." "Now I've got to wash and change," complained Zrenel. "So you get him dressed for Daimon's big reception." "Not happening," Branst told his brother. "I've got more reason to be on time than you do." "Tessitat Monitum, I suppose," Zrenel said disapprovingly. "She'll never marry you, Branst. She's too Vrelish." "I don't want to get married," Branst said, offended. "Huh," said Zrenel. "You would marry her in an instant if she let you. Face it, bro. Beneath the court veneer, you are all Nessak." "You're the Nessak," Branst yelled at Zrenel's departing back. The door closed. Frowning, Brantz turned to assess the unwelcome task he had inherited. Horth got down off the bed to wait for directions. He could dress himself, of course, but not in a manner acceptable for a formal court reception. He was still too childish to master that, although he had shot up taller than Brantz in the last month, and his bare chest was hard-muscled. "I will not be late," Brantz muttered, unhappily. Then an idea occurred to him. "I'll get Alice to do it." "Mother," Horth warned. The strangeness of his new, very deep voice had set his fluency with words back a year or two. "What Mother doesn't know can't hurt our character development," said Brantz, and sprinted out the door. Alice arrived looking breathless, with Brantz's arm around her waist and her hair disordered. Horth could smell her sexual arousal. "Dress your brother, Master Brantz?" Alice faltered, looking Horth up and down with trepidation. Brantz kissed her for courage. "You can do it," he said, and turned her around to face his looming little brother. "Oh, I know," Brantz admitted. "He looks all grim and grown up, but he's still just a kid, honest." Brantz snatched clothes out of Horth's closet. "Skip his shower," he advised Alice, heaping the clothes on Horth's unmade bed. "Just make sure his jacket is laced up and his pants aren't wrinkled." "I don't know," Alice fretted. "I can't wait," Brantz told her, snatching up the last of his own accessories and buckling on his sword. "Tessatat's expecting me." Alice looked as if she were about to cry, even as she hung on every word Brantz uttered. The power of her attraction seemed to radiate from her. Brantz's hand stroked down her back as he left, and she shuddered. Horth caught his own breath, shaken by the strange new feelings of excitement that tormented him in unexpected situations, like this one. Brantz disappeared out the door. Alice took a deep breath and turned to Horth, the flush on her cheeks still prominent. Horth only meant to inhale deeply to help him find his balance. He never remembered deciding to do something different, but between one moment and the next, he had Alice in his arms. She gave a shriek, which bothered him, but she was so easy to control it seemed she didn't mind somehow. A twist and a push knocked her onto the bed beneath him. He knew what he wanted, and it didn't require clothes. He started trying to tear off her uniform. Alice screamed louder. She pushed her arms against his bare chest without making much of an impression. She felt good and she smelled right. The problem of getting her clothes off became urgent. Horth barely registered her screaming, except as an irritation he might have stopped by clamping his hand over her mouth, as if his hands were not already fully occupied. He did not hear Zersarn come in behind him. His senses were swamped. He did not anticipate a thing until he was yanked up by a pair of strong hands. Heaved clear of Alice, Horth struck a dresser and scrambled up, ready for violence. "Vrelish animal," Zersarn roared in his sonorous voice. The sound boomed around the room like a gong. "Real Nessaks do not commit the error of debasement." Horth blinked, too shocked to get air back into his lungs. He was, of course, well aware of Mother's attitude to breeding down. Until that moment, however, he had never thought of the issue as something that personally concerned him. Now, he felt ashamed to be caught with Alice by Zersarn, and distressed by his loss of control. At the same time, Alice's look of betrayed trust condemned him on entirely different grounds. She sat bolt upright on the bed, clutching at her open pants and pale with alarm. Clearly, he had done something very wrong. Alice overcame her horror long enough to scramble off the bed and skitter past the glowering Nessak and out the door. Horth went after her, wanting to fix what had gone wrong. Mother came out of her bedroom on the way to the nursery to tend to her plants and saw Alice streak past. It surprised her to see her youngest son in pursuit, and she cried, "Horth!" in the sharp, crisp voice she used when she meant business. Horth stopped. Between one breath and the next, he suddenly saw his mother as a full-figured woman with a straight carriage, heart-shaped face, and wide green eyes. His nostrils flared and his jaw locked, hands fisted. He narrowed his eyes, drawing on other feelings about her to help thrust aside the new, unwelcome awareness. Mother came quickly towards him, her sharpness derailed by the distress she read in his behavior. "What is it?" she asked, reaching for him. Horth flinched away from her. "Horth?" she said, sounding concerned. Zersarn came out of Horth's bedroom. "He was indulging himself with one of the Black Hearth commoners," he said coldly. but his soul is in no danger of a bad rebirth. I had put a stop to it before it went that far." Horth barely heard. He was rocked to the core of his confidence. If this was what it meant to be Relish, he did not want to continue with his current incarnation. He would not live at the mercy of such a powerful impulse. Mother kept her Nessak blade by her bedside. She said it was the road to freedom for trapped souls. The knife was as long as a baby's arm with a double-edged blade etched in Rel symbols that symbolized the cycle of rebirth awaiting unsullied souls. He tore into his parents' bedroom with his mother in pursuit. But once he snatched the knife up, he felt better. He could kill himself with it and get reborn again if necessary. The watching dead would understand and forgive him for what happened with Alice. Once he knew it was as simple as that, he felt calm enough to think about it harder. Mother rushed into the room and froze. "Horth," she gasped. "No, it isn't important enough for that." She looked so frightened that he felt bad, but he didn't want to put the knife down. Holding it helped him to think better. Zersarn came in behind her. Horth narrowed his eyes at the Nessak priest, his thin nostrils flaring. Mother turned around. "Please," she begged, "leave this to me, Uncle." "I told you that Branst was debasing himself with the servant," the priest reproached her, "and you did nothing. Now the contagion is spreading. You must obtain permission from your husband for them to go to Sanhome to find wives as soon as possible, or their souls will be imperiled." Mother looked strained. "I am trying to convince their father, honored uncle and great Zer," she pleaded. "Zrenal has asked too, and Hanks has not said no to him, entirely. I cannot achieve more. Now please, leave me alone with my son, just this once." Zersarn glared, but she stood her ground. He gave in at last, his face stamped in a pinched expression, and left the room. Horth relaxed immediately. He was never in a room with Zersarn without feeling the fine hairs on the back of his neck stiffen. "Give me the spirit knife, Horth, please," Mother begged him, extending her slim, white hand. Horth did not know how to tell her that he just wanted to hold it for a while, so he put the knife down on her dressing table. "Thank you, my ancestors," exclaimed Beryl, nearly fainting. Horth helped her onto her favorite armchair, feeling awkward. She used to seem so powerful to him. Now, her trembling troubled him. She clasped his corded man's hand into her little white one and held on. He knelt by her knee as he often did when she recited Nessak stories to him and his brothers. "I have been watching you grow up, Horth," she said. "I've seen what your Vrelish blood puts you through. But remember, there is no harm in being Vrelish that can't be overcome. I have told you many times about the Vrelish error." Horth nodded. He had memorized a great deal of the Nessak canon, because it was easier for him to memorize and recite words than it was to produce original sentences. There were 4 errors. He thought his way through the first 3, the error of debasement, which meant breeding with commoners, the Lorel error, that covered putting too much faith in reason as a means to prevent the misuse of banned sciences, and the Pol error, sometimes known as Okal lumens, a Demish branch of Okal Rel that worships the Pol virtues of kindness and compassion and place too much faith in literature's ability to guide mankind. "Tell me about the Vrelish error," said Horth's mother. Horth found his place, mentally, and recited. "The Vrelish error is also known as the Rel error, because the Vrelish pursue what is Rel and dismiss everything Pol. Those who stray down this path become wild souls who indulge all their lusts. Some Vrelish can even be honorable, in space and in duels, although never in marriage." Horth noticed Mother look away, and sped up. "Their bodies suit their passions, making them fierce fighters who are quick to mature. Such souls may live out many lives in this condition, but in the end they exceed the patience of the watching dead, and suffer soul death if they cannot conquer their excesses in one hard life, and be reborn less Vrelish in the next one." Beryl stroked Horth's blue-black hair. "You see," she said, "the Vrelish are redeemable. Vrelish blood can even make you a great warrior, and what harm can there be in any soul as honest as yours?" She touched his face. "Sex is nothing to be ashamed of," she told her son. "It is the answer to death, the way to bring new life to waiting souls. Such urges are sacred. You must simply be careful about who you share yourself with, because your soul may follow your error into the next generation." Horth was not sure he understood, but he felt calmer. "Good," said Beryl. getting up and brushing down the pleats of the dress she was wearing. "Now come along and let me get you out of those pajamas." Horth followed her back to his bedroom where Mother dressed him with great skill, although she herself would never put on the courtly clothes required for the kind of Demish-influenced event he was supposed to attend at Green Hearth. "Only 11, she said when she was finished, and sighed as if she feared the Vrelish error might prove too potent. Her fingers lingered on the side of his dress jacket that featured her side of his inheritance. "All Nessaks have some Vrelish blood, you know," she said, tracing a red thread in her family pattern. "San herself was as lusty as any Vrelish woman, but she kept to her husband and bore him 12 sons who founded the royal lines of San home." Her fingers lifted, crossed his chest, and settled on the black and red pattern on the other side of his dress jacket. "There," she said. "Now you are ready for Daimon's reception." Horth did not want to go to the reception. Tessitat would be there, and Brance would be fawning all over her. Daimon would be trying to get the Vrelish people, like father, to mix politely with the Demish guests who badly outnumbered them. Zrenal would spend the whole time muttering things under his breath about both Vrelish and Demish excesses that echoed Mother's stories of the errors. And all of it would blur in a senseless roar of conversations assaulting him from all directions. Reciting the errors was all the talking and thinking he needed for at least another 24 hours. Nonetheless, Horth was striding through the entrance hall, resigned to making his appearance at the reception next door in Green Hearth, when Hara burst out of the errant's barracks on one side of the hall behind him. "Horth!" he heard her grind out as he spun around. She was flanked by a couple of the errants under her command, the woman smirking and the man looking as severe as Hara. "Come with me," Hara ordered. Hara led him through a barracks door, down a corridor, and into a small common room where 6 servants were gathered around Alice, who sat huddled in the arms of the Black Hearth cook, crying her eyes out. "Right, girl?" Hara said to Alice. "Tell us what happened." Alice swallowed, struck mute by the intense attention. Cook got up, looking shaky, and faced Horth. Her nervousness puzzled him. He didn't see why Cook had any reason to be nervous, unless it was because he had grown so much bigger and stronger since his last raid on the kitchen. "Master Horth tried to rape Alice," Cook declared, stuttering over the words. Horth frowned. He knew what the word rape meant, and he didn't like being accused of it. "Hey, and he's only 11, the female errant, Kendi, broke the silence, sounding as if she was proud of him. "That's enough," Hara snapped. "Horth," she demanded, "what did you do wrong?" The question engaged Horth because it was exactly what he was trying to figure out. Zersarn had called him a Vrelish animal. Mother talked about the Vrelish error. Cook and Hara clearly felt he had messed up, but rape was too severe a charge in Horth's opinion. He would have never hurt Alice. At least, he didn't think he would have. Suddenly, it occurred to him that only one person knew for sure how gravely his misconduct should be judged. "Ask Alice," he told Hara. Kendi blurted a laugh. Hara snapped her fist into the errant's face to remind her who was in charge. Kendi staggered into a side table that spilled its contents on the floor. "Ask Alice, is it?" said Hara. "Good idea. And you do that, Horth Nersal. Right now. And you tell him, Alice, loud and clear, in words, I suggest, of no more than 3 syllables. Or you can bet it's going to happen again. That is, if you're still around once Liege Nersal finds out you have been sleeping with Branst, which is probably what gave Horth the idea." Alice shuddered like a Rel ship about to shatter. "Captain Hara, I—" "Save it for Liege Nersal," Hara rapped back at her with a scowl. "But first, you make it clear to Horth here what he's done wrong." She glowered. "Do a decent job of that, and I'll put in a good word for you. If you think you can remember, in the future, not to seduce Hearthsons you have no right to breed with." Alice began, going white, and decided against arguing the point with Hara. "I'll talk to Master Horth," she forced out. Everyone filed out except Hara, who eyed Horth with one of her no-nonsense stares and said, "Hands off, remember." Horth nodded, confident that would not be a problem. Alice's distress annoyed him now as much as her antics with Branst had stimulated him earlier. He found himself thinking, instead, about the smirking female errant Kendi, who had winked at him as she filed past dabbing the blood on her mouth. Alice sat down again on the couch. "Listen, Master Horth," she said, twisting her hands in her lap. "You frightened me, a lot," she gulped. Horth shrugged. He didn't see how it was his fault. Guess you don't have, a lot of experience with women? Alice ventured. No, said Horth. Alice giggled a little hysterically. I'm sorry, she said immediately. It's just, you are so frank. She inhaled, pulled herself together as best she could, and said, I didn't want to have sex with you. You do it with Branst, said Horth, relying on the idiom he'd picked up in the errant's barracks. Alice turned a fascinating scarlet color. Oh, gods! And it is going to come to your father's attention now because of this incident. She seemed to have tied herself in knots. Horth wanted to let her know that he had not meant to get her and Branst in trouble, but the ideas flew around in his head without an organizing principle to help him get them out. But then it was too late, because Alice was smiling at him, trying to look confident. You don't know much about women, do you? She said. I mean real women, not relish ones like that errant, Kendi, who thinks being oversexed at 11 is cute. Or women like Tessatat Monotum. Alice burst into tears, and had to take a moment to master herself before she could continue. Ordinary women don't always feel the same about, well, you know what you wanted to do with me, as men do. Oh, listen, just don't force yourself on an inferior. That makes sense, doesn't it? Even to someone as relish as you? She ended in a snappish tone. Horth nodded. He understood Alice was not willing to behave with him the way she had with Branst. That clarified everything. There were things that were reasonable to demand of an inferior, and things that were not. That settled, Horth found himself dejected and completely unmotivated to attend Daimon's reception. He made his way back to the entrance hall in a brooding frame of mind, got as far as the doors that opened onto Fountain Court, and bolted back into Black Hearth, heading for the Octagon, where he could work off his bruised and restless feelings with exercise. Kendi followed him down there. She strolled onto the practice floor on Black Wedge, watched him work out for a while, and then pulled a blunt-ended practice sword off a rack and joined him for a bout. Horth found himself immediately distracted. She was also an inferior, of course, but there was no doubt in his mind that she was far from unwilling to teach him more than fencing moves. She probed dangerously with her point first, which helped Horth to focus. Neither of them had headgear on, which was not uncommon even for friendly sparring matches between Nersalians, but more serious than a straight workout. She was good enough that he had to pay attention. But when they closed for the first time, blades caught too close to wield. He got a nose full of her sex smell, and he half forgot what they were doing with their swords. Fortunately, the impact was mutual. They slid their blades together, up and down, trying to disengage, but as long as they stayed close, the blades were locked. Horth then pushed her blade slowly outwards, to his left, away from both of them, leaving their bodies open and the heat of their attraction pulling them inward like a magnet. Horth was faintly alarmed at his giddiness, but unwilling to end the good feelings running riot in his spellbound body. This time, it was Kendi who got yanked clear, by Hara. Kendi caught her breath but failed to recover in time to defend herself from Hara's punch. She went down on her bottom with a broken nose. Her sword clattered on the floor and rolled away. Think with your head, not your mouth, Hara told Kendi, using the vulgar word for a relish woman's muscular lower mouth. No female errant messes with the sons of her liege house unless she's earned her liege's blessing to breed up. Kendi snorted angrily and spat blood, but she didn't get up. I wasn't going to get pregnant by him, she defended herself to her captain. Hara folded her arms. Whoever plans to get pregnant, she threw back. But it's not up to you, is it? Her expression became unforgiving. Or are you one of those that thwart the waiting dead with Fernie? No, Kendi hotly defended her honor. I just didn't think— Exactly, exclaimed Hara. Then relented, reached down, and pulled Kendi up to her feet again. Have Norris see to the nose if it's broken, she ordered. I didn't do anything, Kendi defended herself, the hand over her nose muffling her voice a little. We were just sparring. Uh-huh, said Hara, skeptically. Well, no harm's done, so we'll leave it at that. You, however, she said to Horth, are coming with me. You need an education. Hara took Horth to a courtesan den on the other side of Undergelion, in a freehold district run by commoners who derive their protection from the patronage of important clients. "Captain Hara," she was greeted by their smiling hostess. "Good to see you again." "This is Horth Nersal," said Hara, laying her palm on Horth's shoulder. "He's only 11, but as you can see, he is too grown up to remain a virgin without causing trouble." "I see what you mean," said the woman, acknowledging Horth with an easy smile that was free of the smirking jocularity that made Horth's predicament embarrassing. She eased a sheet of golden hair over one shoulder. "Liz is good with beginners," she decided, "and she copes well enough with Vrelish customers. Third door on the left," she concluded, pointing. Hara gave Horth a reassuring pat on the back and a slight push in the right direction. "Go on," she told him. "The girl you find inside will make it easy, and there'll be no fertility issues to interfere. All courtesans at Ava's are sterile." Something irked Horth about that idea. He had an instinctive feeling that sex ought to be bound up with at least the possibility of complications, and made an unwelcome but involuntary comparison with herd animals raised on Tark that were neutered for the convenience of others. "Is Terrell free?" Hara asked, eyes shearing off to pan the small crowd of about 20 patrons, entertainers, and novices on the den's central floor, called the Patrons' Round. "No, I'm afraid he's engaged," said their hostess. "But let me introduce you to an alternative selection." With Hara gone, Horth decided seeking Liz would be better than standing around looking out of place. He crossed the Patrons' Round in quick strides, went down the corridor indicated, and was dutifully headed for the third door when he heard raised voices coming from one of the rooms he was passing. Horth could tell by the pronouns that leapt out at him that the disputants were Sevelites of unequal classes. The noble-born woman was Vrelish, and the man was a Demish highborn. He had no trouble identifying the sound of a sword being drawn either. On impulse, Horth drew his own sword and went through the door. He knew it was stupid, but somehow it felt infinitely easier than solving the social problem of how to relate to a female courtesan. Inside, Horth found a single Vrelish woman confronting 3 silver Demish men, and the courtesan who had been entertaining her cowering well back out of harm's way. The woman was half-dressed, wearing only underpants beneath a loose tunic with a deep V-neck that revealed slices of her small, firm breasts. The Demish highborn was backed up by a pair of his liveried errants. Both errants had bared their swords, presumably to address the woman's challenge, within challenge class, on behalf of their superior. Except that 2-on-1 was not honorable. The Vrelish woman had shut up, and she seemed to be having second thoughts about clearing her sword under the circumstances. But the whole dynamic changed the moment Horth entered the room with his sword drawn. The Demish highborn pivoted, covered by one of his errants, while the second kept his attention on the Vrelish woman. "Nurse Sal?" the Demish highborn said, sounding puzzled. He devoured the details encoded on the braid on Horth's formal jacket in a gulp, and experimented with a friendly manner. "One of Liege Nersal's half-Nessac sons, it would appear. Branst, is it?" "Horth," said Horth. "Horth? But Horth is 11 years old. Well..." The Demish man thought better of completing that thought. "In any case, I am Evan Pond, vassal to Liege de Forest of Linereach. My dispute with Liege Thriss here is a matter of trade business and none of your family's affair. You have no cause to interfere, young man." "No!" Liege Thriss cried excitedly, shifting her feet. The point of her sword twitched back and forth across a narrow field equidistant from the 2 Demish errants opposing her. The energy she gave off was intoxicating, and the cloth of her tunic quivered with her rapid breaths. "Stay," she commanded him. "If they want to fight, I need a Vrelish judge of honor present." "This is ridiculous," Evan Pond said fussily. "No stake has been declared, no duel is at issue. You draw your sword, not us." "Because you meant to have your men here rough me up," said Nans Thriss. "You couldn't bully me in space, so you've decided to take care of it at court." "I have never heard such unbecoming twaddle from a woman," cried Evan Pond, puffing up with indignation. "I sought you out to offer one last chance to see reason, short of any kind of violence, out of consideration for the fact that you are a woman, even if you are a Vrelish one." "Ha!" Nans Thriss barked a rude laugh. "Go on. Convince me you would treat me better if I wore a skirt and kept my mouth shut." Her vulgar slang choice of the word for mouth made Lord Pond react as if stung by a particularly nasty bug. He went red in the face as he reached for his own sword. Horth addressed that move with an attack he expected to be blocked by Lord Pond, and it was. But Horth moved so fast, his Demish peer made a rapid transition from fury to white-faced shock. Everyone froze. "This is a misunderstanding," Lord Pond got out, with faltering nerve as he met Horth's eyes over their crossed weapons. Horth jerked his head in the direction of the door. Lord Pond took a step and edged around in that direction, deciding not to pursue the argument with swords. "I know what this is about," he blustered. "She's taking advantage of you by making a display of herself." "I was busy with Terrell here when you barged in," Thriss interrupted, less nervous and more strident with each retreating step the Demish High Lord took. Lord Pond looked at the male courtesan, who responded with a weak smile from the back of the room. "My liege, Prince Husa, will see your father hears of this." Lord Pond got in a parting shot at Horth. Then he sheathed his sword with a flourish and waved his errands out the door. "We are not finished, madam," he fired at Liege Thriss before he swept out. Horth and Thriss remained staring at each other for 2 seconds. Then they both put up their swords. She said, "Thanks." Her grey eyes narrowed. "How old did Pond say you are?" Horth didn't care much for that question. He sheathed his sword with what he hoped was an entirely adult display of no-nonsense competence. "Will you be wanting me to stay, Your Grace?" the courtesan asked insightfully, and took the answering hand wiggle from Thriss as a dismissal. She seemed to have eyes only for Horth. When the courtesan had let himself out, Nance Thriss put her hands on her narrow hips and said, "I like your style, Blackhearth. You nearly made Pond mess himself." Horth indulged in a spontaneous grin. He was noticing something about himself and women. He responded best to the ones who looked like they were interested in sex. Thriss had put her sword away, but was still dressed in only her tunic and underwear. She stepped closer slowly, keeping an eye on his reactions in case she had misread his own receptivity. Horth's pulse quickened. He felt her heat as she slid one foot between his. He was male, she was female. Awareness of that one critical issue soaked his overloaded senses. He remembered Hara warning him about accepting the advances of social inferiors, but it was like a distant voice crying from a hilltop. They came together with urgency. His sword belt got in the way. She laughed and waited for him to shed it himself, with less than his usual dexterity, before she helped undress him from the waist down. She had little left herself to shed. Horth experienced sex for the first time in a molten blur too fierce to call pleasure. It was over before he knew what had happened. His head was aching with the sheer force of his pounding heart that served him well in a rail ship under high G's, but was overpowered for the circumstances. He saw spots before his eyes and had to collapse on the mattress embedded in the floor, where they had wound up. Thriss lay on his chest, breathing heavily. Then she started undoing the jacket they had not waited to get off him. She took her time now, caressing him as she went. The sensations were easier to bear and more like pleasure. By the time she got around to suggesting things physically that he wasn't sure he wanted to do, he was ready for sex again. But he asserted his preference for sticking to basics with force. She was happy enough to accommodate him. The low sounds she made in her throat as they merged stroked his nerves like myriad electric hands. She wrapped her legs around his back and sunk her teeth into his shoulder hard enough to force him to fight back as they made love. They rolled back and forth across the sunken mattress, chests pounding hard against each other, boiling in a hot bath of lust. Horth voiced a wordless cry as he climaxed, and was swallowed by close crowding darkness as his heart seemed to drown him in the pounding of his own blood. He came to again almost instantly and surged to his feet, panting with surprise in the aftermath of his excitement. Sanity restored, he felt he'd had enough for one session. He needed a moment to sort his reactions out and think about what he'd done. With a shake to dispel the feeling of intoxication that still clung to him, he went looking for his shed clothes. Liege Thriss of Spiral Hall gave a throaty chuckle as she watched from where she sprawled, completely naked, on the mattress of the sunken bed on the floor. She was muscular and narrow-hipped, with smaller breasts than Alice. Her genital mound was more prominent than a commoner's, however, and her anatomy proportionally enhanced. It was widely believed among the Vrelish that the average female could wear out 2 or 3 males before she would be sated herself. Horth was more inclined to believe it now, given his experience. "So," said Thriss, while Horth was lacing up his dress jacket with slightly shaky hands, "you are Horth of Blackhearth, the Vrelish one of the Nessac litter, I've heard." She smiled at him smugly. "Bit inhibited like most Nersalians, of course, but worth teaching." She shifted up on an elbow. "I'm Nans, Liege of Thriss. That's a trading house based out of Spiral Hall. You might have heard of Thriss. We're known for our wine exports." She expected him to be impressed, but the threat of conversation had not dawned on him until now. Panic struck him dumb. Hara saved him by bursting in the door. "Gods, Horth!" she exclaimed, with the sweep of her arm that invited the waiting dead to share her frustration. "What do I have to do? Supervise you? Courtesan, boy! I said a courtesan!" Thriss scuttled to her feet and snatched up her sword, stark naked. "Don't tempt me," Hara said between her teeth, looking dangerous. Thriss took in Hara's housebraid and lowered the sword again carefully. "Get dressed and go home," Hara told the other woman in a curt tone. She cut an imposing figure, her feet planted wide and her arms set akimbo, the insignia of her captaincy bold on her breast above the crimson claw marks of the dragon that were known throughout the Empire as the symbol of House Nersal. Thriss decided to be nonchalant. "Stay loose, Blackhearth," she told Hara. "I haven't done your liege son any harm." Hara made a grunting sound. "We'll see about that, Spiral Hall." Thriss shrugged. She pulled on the bare minimal required for decency, stuffing the rest of her clothes in a pocket of her traveling cloak. The last thing she did was strap on her sword. "Later," she said to Horth with a smile that he could not help returning. Hara strode over to Horth when Thriss was gone and cuffed him across the temple with a half-fisted hand. "What did I tell you about staying clear of lusty Vrelish nobleborns?" Horth did not like getting hit. He put up with it because it came from Hara. "Let's go home before you get into any more trouble," she railed at him, "and hope that glutton isn't fertile." Horth had entirely forgotten about the breeding issue, but he felt smugly pleased at the same time that it was possible he might have solved his freedom price problem before either Branst or Zrenal. Despite the smug element to his reaction, he managed to maintain a chagrined silence all the way home. When he got there, he did something unusual for him in the middle of the morning and went back to bed for a glorious nap. He had never slept better. Hours later, towards the end of the day cycle, he was woken by the sound of Branst entering the bedroom. "You awake?" Branst asked, coming over to sit on the side of Horth's bed. Horth sat up. He had been warm under the covers, but the air in the room was pleasantly cool on his bare chest. "Tessitat spent the whole reception with me," Branst told Horth in a low voice, pumped full of excitement. Horth remembered something more important. "Alice," he said. "Alice?" Branst echoed, puzzled. "I frightened her," Horth said carefully in his deep voice. Branst blinked at him, still puzzled. Then, slowly, he looked distressed. "Is she all right?" Zrenal barged in and turned up the lights with a quick stroke of a nerve-cloth panel. "You're in trouble," he crowed at Branst. "Father wants to see you in his bedroom, right away." Branst sprang up off the bed and headed out the door, a look of instant dread on his face. Zrenal went after him. By the time Horth caught up, Branst was already confronting both their parents in the portion of the master bedroom where Mother had set up a bit of a parlor. Alice was not there. Neither was Zer Sarn, which Horth appreciated. "Send her away," Branst was saying, hotly. "Why?" "She seduced you of her own free will," Father said. He stood very straight, as he always did, as adamant and unmoved as the marble walls of Fountain Court. "It's not fair," cried Branst. And whose fault is that? Zrenal said sternly. You know how Mother feels about commoners, particularly the risk of having children with them. And you know Father doesn't sterilize Nersalian domestics like the Demish do, or indulge them like the Monatees either. What did you think was going to happen? Alice is pregnant? Branst asked, looking stunned and baffled. The point is, Father said, that she could have been. He paused. Couldn't she? Said Branst, the anger draining out of him to be replaced by a look of guilty dread. Branst, Zrenal exclaimed. You didn't, not Fernie. No, Branst protested and looked down as he mumbled. There are other ways. Things you can buy on the Ava's way. He looked up with cheeks burning. I made sure that Alice wouldn't get pregnant. I wasn't child gifting without family permission. Oh, Branst, Mother said in a half-swallowed, disappointed tone of voice. Brand's bravado wilted. I'm sorry, he said. Will you take responsibility? Father asked him. Branst went a shade paler. Responsibility? He asked shakily. If Alice is to blame, Father told him, she must leave. If you are, then you must be disciplined. 3 lashes on Black Wedge with the screens down, Zrenal told his brother pompously. In a whipping frame, just like a criminal. Zrenal, Horth decided, was jealous because he hadn't had a girl yet himself. Mother and Father couldn't agree on how to arrange for his freedom price, and he was too susceptible to Mother's feelings about such things to let Hara take him to a place like Den Ava's. What would happen to Alice if... Branst faltered. That's not the point, Hank said firmly. What matters is which of you is responsible. That person is the one who should be punished. Oh, please send the creature away, despaired Mother. Why do you think we have urges? Zrenal took it upon himself to lecture Branst. There's a reason. When you go having sex without even the chance of conception, you cheat the waiting dead. Branst turned on Zrenal in a temper. You find me one errant in Greenhearth who doesn't cheat one way or the other, and... Exactly, Mother cried in a sharp voice, as if Branst had hurt her. She rose to her feet in a tower of moral grandeur, her green eyes blazing at her strayed middle son. Errants, non-eternals, soulless nobleborns. With that, Mother turned on her heels and retired deeper into the bedroom to go lie down. Father followed her with his eyes a moment, clearly concerned. Zrenal and Branst were still arguing. You should never sleep with any woman you aren't willing to sire a child by, Zrenal shouted. It's an insult to her. Oh, and you're worried about me insulting Alice, are you? Branst hurled back. That's enough, Father exclaimed. Branst, will you take responsibility or not? Branst quailed. He knew he ought to, but he was afraid. Horth could see that, but 3 lashes on Black Wedge would be better than what Alice would face if she was turned out. Commoners died on Gileon without a family to shelter them. For a moment, Horth was certain Branst was going to spare his back and doom Alice. Then Brant's green eyes met Horth's steady grey ones, and Horth knew his brother could not live with himself if he did that. I will take the lashes, Branst said, sounding hoarse. Father put a hand on Brant's shoulder and squeezed. Tomorrow, he said. Now go back to bed. Father called Horth back as he made to follow Branst and Zrenal out the door. Anticipating a sentence of 3 lashes on Black Wedge for his own misconduct at Den Ava's, Horth waited for his father to pass judgment. I've heard about Liege Thriss of Spiral Hall, Hengst, Liege of Nersal, told Horth in a low voice, and checked over one shoulder to be sure that Mother had not heard before he went on. Are you taking Fernie? Hengst asked. No, Father, said Horth. Father inhaled with a measure of relief, and the sense of one danger being bypassed at the cost of running smack into another. Have you thought, then, about what the woman wants? No, Horth admitted. Come with me, said Hengst, and led the way out of Black Hearth and across Fountain Court to Greenhearth next door. Daimon received them in his ear lounge. "I'll be blunt," Hangst began. Daimon smiled. "You usually are." Both Horth and his father sat down. Daimon remained on his feet, but he leaned comfortably against the side of the couch facing them. None of them were wearing swords. Daimon was dressed casually in a quilted jacket for an evening at home. Hangst's attire was equally casual, and Horth was wearing nothing over his pajamas but a traveling cloak donned in the Black Hearth entrance hall. He wished he had asked for the time to dress himself properly now. He didn't like feeling scruffy under the circumstances. "Horth has just been seduced by a Spiral Hall woman named Nans Thriss," Hangst began. "A pregnancy is possible." He looked at Horth. "I don't know if an ongoing relationship is likely or not." Horth had not thought that far. "In any case," Hangst carried on, never surprised by Horth's silences, "I would like your opinion of the woman's honor. I do not know enough about Spiral Hall." Daimon was silent for a moment. Then he straightened up, moved away from the couch, and poured himself a drink of Monatee's whiskey before he came to sit down. The drink in his glass was a dusky green hue. "Nans Thriss is an opportunistic trader," said Daimon. "For 18 months now, she has been running shipments of her wine to stations in Lionhouse Reach that have an honor bond with Evan Pond. She has no right of trade acknowledged by the Demish, which makes her a pirate in their eyes. Silver Hearth took out one of her freighters en route when it refused to turn back, and since the freighter was destroyed, there is an open question, even in Demish terms, of which side has committed the greater wrong. Thriss tried to appeal to Vretl'Vrel at last night's reception, to take it to a duel on the Octagon. Something," Daimon added in a steely tone, "that I will not allow." "Because your fledgling Liege Vrel is too young?" Hangst asked. "Because she is too valuable to risk over every petty shake-up Spiral Hall stirs up." Daimon betrayed his temper briefly, and put his drink down on a side table. "Gods, Hangst!" he exclaimed when it was done. "Isn't it obvious what Thriss will try to use Horth for? She'll get pregnant first, and then she'll trick Pond into accepting her challenge, out of challenge class, or set him up in some other way that will only work if she can field a highborn champion. Pond will feel complacent and might agree to something unwise to get the question of the destroyed freighter settled under sword law. Then she'll substitute Horth, by right of paternity, making sure it is his life that she risks and not her own. She has a keen reputation for trade, but not much of a record on the challenge floor. That's why she tried to get Vretla involved." Daimon frowned. "All in all, I'd say Thriss suffered a very convenient bout of ungovernable lust at Den Ava's." Hangst looked at Horth. "What Daimon has just explained," he said, speaking slowly and carefully, "is that Liege Thriss may be trying to get pregnant in order to command your sword on her behalf in a trade dispute." "The freighter," Horth said to prove that he could listen. He had decided Thriss was right. The Demish had no right to shatter her freighter, although he was dimly aware that his opinions might be influenced by heady memories. Hangst nodded. "That's right, Horth. I know you want a freedom price as much as Branster's Renal so you can become a Rel Shah with the fleet. But you were only 11, despite your maturity in some things. Do not gamble with your life too lightly. If you continue to have sex with this woman, you may face your first serious challenge before you see your freedom prize born. Do you understand the risk?" Much too glibly, Horth said, "I understand." "All right," said Hangst and stood up. "Understand this, both of you." He looked first at Horth and then Daimon. "If Horth lets himself be drawn into this challenge, it is Horth who will fight it, not myself, nor either of his brothers, or my femkin." Femkin was the term for Hangst's sisters, aunts, and their respective broods, which encompassed the more conventional outlines of a family unit among the Vrelish, who were matrilineal. "If Horth insists on provoking adult trouble," Hangst concluded, "he will have to live with the consequences, but," Hangst added fiercely, "if Nans Thriss gets pregnant by my son, the child had better be born alive and stay that way, or she will answer for it with the Kimp Stan. And you may advise Liege Thriss not to expect me to gift my grandchild to her free and clear, either. Blackhearth will never waive challenge rights, least of all to her kind. We have noble-born relations hungry for the sort of territory that Thriss owns, and better able to help her people fight calcified Demish trading rights for that matter. Hangst, Daimon was aghast. What are you playing at? Do you want to provoke the Demish and Spiral Hall both at once? Horth could feel his father's anger lying in wait for the right excuse to fetch it forth. Old, compressed, and cold as bedrock. I want, Hangst said slowly, to make it clear how dangerous I can be when provoked. Spiral Hall was a city in a bottle, and the bottle was the base of the citadel below the octagon and fountain court. The citadel was part of the Hullsteel caste that comprised the shell of Undergelion, which meant that living in Spiral Hall was not particularly convenient. It was hard to attach things to Hullsteel, and impossible to drill holes because Hullsteel absorbed stress until it shattered, and very little short of the shearing stresses in a shake-up could accomplish that. How and why the dominant structures of Undergelion were made of Hullsteel was a mystery, but its citizens coped with what they had. In Horth's case, that meant he couldn't get into Spiral Hall to visit Nans Thriss the next morning without descending all the way to the palace plain and climbing back up. Because there were no doors or hatches in the Hullsteel floor between the octagon and the top of Spiral Hall. After passing inspection by Spiral Hall's guards of honor, Horth found himself looking at thin towers, heavily interconnected at all levels by an ad hoc collection of crosswalks and ladders. If there were elevators, he did not know where. He asked for Thriss and had a tower pointed out to him. Halfway up was Thriss's Eyrie, an open level supported by pillars at the corners where visitors were received. Lots of outside staircases, ropes, slides, hoists, and ladders were visible above street level and looked like they might get Horth closer to his destination, but none of them could be accessed without entering a building first. He didn't know any Spiral Hall families well enough to ask for rite of passage, so he started out the slow way by hiking up Spiral Coil, a ledge jutting out from the inner wall that ascended at a 15-degree angle from the bottom to the top. The path was about 2 meters wide. In places, buildings encroached so close that Horth could have jumped across if he had been sure of his welcome. In other spots, it was necessary to weave around things on the left of the walk, or negotiate his way past children more intent on their games than avoiding him. Eventually, Horth had to make his way inward, off Spiral Coil. He studied the three-dimensional terrain ahead, set a course, and crossed over to a building with the ladder hanging down its side. After climbing, he crossed a long suspension bridge to a public platform that served as a junction for a half-dozen paths. A small horde of children were playing there, ringing a miniature challenge floor where a girl and a boy staged a play duel. The lack of railings around the edge of the platform stirred a dim memory of Tessitat telling Branst how safety barriers only encouraged Relish children to play on them. Horth reached Thriss's Eyrie via a ladder up the side of her tower. Diaphanous curtains in a medley of pastel colors hung over the opening, a couple of them gathered up in braided cords. Horth heaved himself over the sill of one open side. He had dropped down on the inside before he realized that Hara had arrived before him. Hara confronted Thriss at a safe distance on the rubberized exercise floor that filled most of the Eyrie's interior. Neither had drawn her sword yet. Ringing the exercise floor in a band about 2 meters wide were various cushions, low tables, and little cabinets full of things stored in drawers. A Relish man and woman dressed in open vests and loose trousers lounged on cushions, watching what was going on. A third Relish nobleborn was standing on the sill opposite Horth, lounging against a corner pillar as casually as if he was not 20 stories up in a room with 4 open sides. "Horth," Nans Thriss said brightly. "Good to see you." Hara stood with her mouth locked in anger and her neck muscles prominent. "I am warning you," she told Thriss. "Leave him alone." "Or you'll what?" Thriss taunted Blackheart's captain of errants. "I won't accept your challenge. I know your reputation and I'm not that stupid. There are witnesses here, and without my agreement to accept your challenge, you have no legal excuse to attack." Good with the law, aren't you? Hara ground out. Coward. Well, said Thriss, with a sly glance in Horth's direction. At least I am an honorable coward. Hara stiffened. What are you implying? She demanded. Do you really want to know? Thriss asked in an acid tone. Do you really want me to discuss in front of one of Princess Beryl's children? Something changed in Hara. Liege Thriss had scored a bad internal blow. Be careful, Blackhearth, Thriss warned, narrowing her almond-shaped eyes. What I have to lay at your feet is much worse than any charge you've come to lay at mine. So be wise. I'll give your protégé an education in the bedroom, and if I ask him to take risks for me in return, I'll pay him back with the freedom price that every Vrelish boy desires. A child? Hara tossed back. With Nersalian challenge entanglements? She spat on the clean exercise floor. It may pass Monitum's inspection for paternity by the time you need Horth to risk his life in your quarrel, but I'll wager it won't survive. Nans Thriss raised her sharp chin in anger. Are you implying I would kill my own child? What arrogance! We're not as afraid as all that of Nersalian entanglements. Besides, challenge rights cut both ways when they cut at all. Maybe I'll gain a piece of Nersalian property one day, Hara could not take any more. She cleared her sword. Immediately, the two lounging Vrelish sprang up, and the one on the windowsill dropped lightly into the room. They hovered, preparing to interfere if tempers were lost. Horth? Hara said crossly, without breaking eye contact with her rival. Let's go home. Now. Horth said simply, no. Hara shocked him with the look of her betrayal. Didn't she want him to act Vrelish? Didn't she want him to be Rel and take risks on the challenge floor for what he wanted? This is not just about you, Hara ground out. That was true, Horth thought stubbornly. It was about Thriss, too. Giving birth could be as dangerous as any duel, and he needed a freedom price as much as he needed sex on terms that were, if not exactly safe, at least mutually acceptable. The trade seemed fair. Akrel, he said, aloud. The boy has made up his mind, Blackhearth, Thriss told Hara. And so has your precious liege. He's looking for a quarrel with the Demish. She shrugged. It suits me to share mine. Now get out, or I'll tell Horth something that he won't forgive you for. No, Hara said, shaking her head. No, I won't let you blackmail me. I won't put up with it. If you've got something to say it, you Demish-tongued horror. The Vrelish witnesses backed off a little, waiting to see what would happen. You would like that, wouldn't you, Hara of Blackhearth? Thriss taunted, getting reckless herself. You'd like me to say something rash and kill me for it. But I know more than you think. I know more than gossip and rumors. I have proof that I could take to Greenhearth. Now wouldn't that be... Hara attacked without warning, drawing and thrusting her sword. Thriss sprang back, her fellow Vrelish shielding her. Horth moved in as well, as anyone trained in the etiquette of sword law was expected to do. It was he who put himself in Hara's way, ahead of the others, and calmly pressed aside her threatening tip with his right palm. She kept her sword poised, however, half extended, and Horth reluctantly slid his own sword out of its sheath, keeping it low. He stared at Hara intensely. She was breathing too hard. Safe among her own kind, Thriss abandoned the calculating gamesmanship she'd demonstrated earlier and hurled out accusations. I know you've been asking after me, Thriss accused Hara. Sending your errands to harass my contacts and pick fights with my pilots. Throwing your weight around to scare me off. Well, I can ask questions too. I'm Red Vrelish, not stupid. Don't mess with traitors when you have something to hide. Hara lurched back away from Horth, lowering her point. Sensing the changing mood, the Vrelish guarding Thriss also drew back, leaving her more exposed. If Thriss accepted Hara's challenge, it would no longer be their business to defend her from spontaneous attack. It would be her right, and Hara's, to short-circuit more laborious means of redress for their quarrel. Hara said stonily, I have nothing to hide. Ha! Thriss cried, her head coming up and her lower lip thrusting out. What about poisoning Beryl's potting soil from San Home with Laurel drugs that cause abortion? What about killing Beryl's unborn children? Horth heard the words and understood them, but they would have meant little if Hara's reaction had not shouted her guilt. Her posture stiffened as she sucked air with a start and expelled it again with a sharp grunt, as if she had been struck in the sternum. It was easy enough, Thriss continued, talking so fast Horth soaked in just enough to get the gist. Years ago, after the duel with her Nessac brothers, there were crates of fresh soil for Beryl's potted garden waiting in a Black Hearth warehouse, forgotten in excitement over the duel. You were in charge of transporting it to Black Hearth. You were in charge of seeing that it came to no harm. When I found out you had also participated in the seizure of a stash of contraband about the same time, I thought to myself, what if Hara had kept a vial or two of childbane that she did not report? The temptation would be great. There you were, seething over Beryl staying on at Black Hearth, and determined that she would steal no more Nersalian souls. And you had the means to blight her womb in your hand. It was the perfect poison. Harmless to the boys who were Blackhearts, despite their mother. Your one mistake, Thriss told Hara, was deciding not to handle the childbane yourself as a woman. So you recruited Rawson, a male errant under your command who hated Nessacs every bit as much as you do. Then you were foolish enough to betray Gil, his McCanst, when your liege sided against her in favor of the Nessacs. You should have stood up for her, Hara. Your henchman would have died before betraying you if you had. Instead, I found him all too ready to talk. Horth saw it all in pictures in his head. Hara palming a vial in the midst of a raid. Hara standing by in the shadows of a warehouse to keep watch as Rawson poured its contents into Mother's soil. The two of them sealing the crate again. Mother working in her garden, poisoned by the soil of her beloved homeworld. Horth did not voice his challenge. He felt it. Hara knew. She did not attempt to decline. She turned to face him as the Vrelish nobleborns surrounding them moved clear. Horth attacked. He had hoped to be quick, piercing her chest before she could react, but he knew instantly that was a mistake. Hara's training was evidenced by the muscle memory in her hand and arm, and she had parried so fast and efficiently that she probably didn't even know at first that she had done so. Horth twisted away from her automatic riposte, fletching sideways in a great jump. As his scabbard bounced around madly, he avoided her point, but it still caught in the embroidery of his vest and ripped out of it sideways. Vrelish duels were normally fought bare-chested or in light shirts, and Horth silently swore at himself for the complication. Hara pressed forward, beating Horth's blade away and thrusting in repeated succession. Behind Horth, he knew there was Vrelish clutter, pillows and ornament-filled cabinets on the floor. He broke left, towards the door sill where spectators had lounged moments before. The sill was now empty, their audience all safely inside with both feet on the Ares floor. But Horth realized he would be partially trapped in the doorway, and flung himself away again, back down to the floor. It looked like Horth was trying to avoid Hara now, and that was partly true. He needed time to think, because at close quarters, with Hara's experience, she would be deadlier than he. They studied each other in lethal silence, circling slowly now. Their scabbards scudded back and forth around their legs, but they were both trained to avoid tripping on them. Horth was keeping well away, but he could not do so forever. At least there was something right about the situation that had been wrong. Thriss's accusations had turned Horth's young life inside out. But here, in the midst of the duel, Hara felt like Hara to Horth once more. Capable, dangerous, proud. Horth's mouth stretched in a feral smile, sharing the purity of her excitement. Attesting to the core of teacher and pupil. Hara usually won 3 out of 5 of their practice bouts on the octagon. But now it was different. Rarefied and sharpened. Intense beyond anything he had felt before. Hara settled now, squatting deeper, placing more weight on her back leg, and Horth could feel what was coming. It was Hara's trademark, the style he knew so well. She began to envelope him with small beats and cuts, never opening her guard wide, taking away the genesis of any of his own actions by subtle, sharp countermoves, and then flicking at his legs, at his arm, at his chest, keeping her blade in a constant combination of offense and defense. She would smother any attack of his whole while she prepared her own, and before she finally made a killing stroke. Hara's face was hot with bitter anger and spoiled affection. She was going to kill him. He did not resent that, somehow, despite his certainty that she was the one in the wrong, but he wasn't going to make it easy for her out of any misplaced sentiments. As long as he moved away, Horth could avoid Hara's killing stroke, so he kept just out of reach, edging backward and sideways as he tried to find her blade or avoid it. And then, as Horth allowed his arm to flow mechanically in the exchanges, he saw his chance, a strategy. But he would have to let Hara get very close to killing him. His guard became sloppy and tired. His arm became weaker, and Hara's blade began to cut him, on the wrist, on the knee. He could see her confidence build, and he retreated slowly, a beaten man. The two strategies began to entwine. Horth watched her eyes and her shoulders. There would be a moment different from the rest. His instincts were screaming at him to fight back harder, to take control, but he had to wait. He stopped thinking and watched her, ignoring the bite of her steel as it scraped his flesh. His hand went up through its motions without him now, and he felt no pain. And then he slowly gave her the distance, gave her what she wanted, and he watched for the moment, watched her eyes. Then it was there. Hara's eyes grew brighter, her shoulder bunched. The stroke was a second intention bind, where she had offered her point to his parry, but immediately took the point back and levered hers down on top of his towards his stomach. It was a brilliant move, one which she had set up carefully, and would have been surprising to most opponents. Horth let it happen, but at the same time he detached his own point, turned his body sideways, and counterattacked. It had all happened in less than half a second. They stood still, locked as if frozen, while both blades seemed to have gone through their intended victims. Hara tried to suck in her breath, but she couldn't. Her mouth opened. She looked down. Then she stepped backwards on faltering legs. She let loose her grip and left her sword sagging from Horth's vest. Horth yanked his sword out of Hara's torso, and she fell. Then he shunted out her sword from his vest with his other hand and tossed it away, striking mutely on the rubber floor. He hardly felt the sliced flesh along his midriff that he knew to be there. One of the Vrelish darted over, wordlessly offering a seamer for Hara, but quickly saw there would be little the first aid device could do in the case of such a wound. Hara made a choking sound and coughed blood. "Don't!" she begged Horth, and a hand that was still strangely strong and powerful grabbed his free hand, although the extended fingers trembled. "Don't be a Nessack!" She made the choking sound again, and her eyes grew frightened. She was drowning in her own blood. Horth felt for ribs with the end of his freed blade and shoved the tip into her heart. He believed she wanted him to, and, as her eyes closed, her mouth quirked a smile that seemed to tell him he had guessed right. He was afraid her eyes might open again when it was over, and he did not want to see them. Instead, he turned to Thriss and found his desire for her broken. All that he could think about was Rawson. Hara was dead, but her accomplice was still alive. Horth wiped his blade on a pillow, sheathed the weapon, and cleared out, leaving Hara where she'd fallen on the airy floor, something he later regretted. Most of the way he ran. He barged through a Vrelish family picnicking on a sloping path. He kicked aside belongings left lying around without thinking where they might fall. Once he nearly slipped, and grew more careful. The harder he ran, the longer he could put off confronting what he had done. At the base of the citadel, he headed up the long flight of stairs to the high-borne docks at a run, sweating but comfortable, heart and lungs robust. He ran with his sword belt in his hand, tired of it banging his leg unless he held it with his right hand. The Demish guarding the palace shell did not try to stop him as he tore past, although he heard discussion breaking out behind him as they speculated about why he might be in such a headlong rush. It was not until he saw Black Pavilion that he realized he would have to tell someone what he had done. He slowed to a walk. His heart adjusted quickly. He was hot, but the main effect of the exercise was to leave him feeling loose and comfortable. Something about his demeanor prevented the errands on duty from offering greetings or even a salute. Lywolf happened to be the first member of the household he encountered. "Horth?" asked the Nessac, immediately grasping there was something wrong. Horth wanted help from someone older, and Lywolf was Mother's man. "Childbane," he said, "in Mother's soil." Lywolf believed him. Horth could see it and was grateful. The Nessac's anger rolled out, deep and oceanic. "Who?" Lywolf demanded. "Hara," Horth said without hesitation. Lywolf reached for his own sword. "Where is she?" "Dead," said Horth. Lywolf was taken aback. "How?" Horth had no time for that. "Rawson helped," he said urgently. "Hara's orders." "Blood of the Xerxes," Lywolf cursed in Nessac idiom. "Rawson's gone. Cleared out last night. He must have known." That made sense, Horth realized. Rawson would have fled after telling Thriss what he knew. People began pouring in from both sides of the throat. Lywolf held Horth's eyes long enough to say, "If he is still on Gileon, I'll get him." Then he slid away, leaving Horth to cope again on his own. Zersarn was there, and Father. Mother, as usual, disdained to use rooms frequented by non-Eternals. There was someone else there, too. A woman built like Hara, only taller and with thicker bones. She had a majestic, square-cut face and wide shoulders. Her breasts matched her proportions, but her jacket bound them snug rather than emphasizing any soft curves. She wore liege marks on her collar, and a fleet commander's uniform with braid that declared she belonged to the House of Brillet, a family Horth knew to be close allies of his father. In fact, unless the liege marks lied, she had to be Liege Brillet herself. "What is it, Horth?" Father demanded. "What's happened?" The question broke Horth's heart. He undid his sword belt and handed it firmly to Father with both hands. "I killed Hara," said Horth. It was hours before the family had dragged the whole story out of Horth, working mostly through Branst, who had a knack for putting questions in a way that Horth understood. Zrenal led a couple of Nessac retainers on a hunt for Nan's Thriss to find out what she knew, while Hara's supporters sought out Vrelish witnesses to hear their versions of the fatal duel. Hangst convinced enraged Nersalians who called for Horth's blood to wait until he had gathered all the facts, and with Brillet's help, he organized a trial of honor. Horth's failure to voice his challenge weighed against him, but poisoners were never popular. If Hara was guilty, Horth would have been justified in killing her, even if he had done it at a distance with a handgun. Except that mere possession of that kind of weapon would itself have been cause for summary execution under sword law. Hara's friends insisted she could never have done anything as dishonorable as poisoning a pregnant woman, even if the woman was a Nessac. By the end of the first day of investigations, one Black Hearth errant died on the sword of another in a lawfully declared duel that played out, on the octagon, too fast for Hangst to intervene and postpone. The winner upheld Hara's honor. 6 hours later, both Zersarn and Daimon independently reported that soil samples from Beryl's garden contained childbane, the contraband drug that could induce miscarriage even in a highborn. The Monatees had a longer and more complex name for it than childbane, of course, but anything Greenhearth and Zersarn could agree upon was generally accepted to be true. It was losing its potency with time, Daimon explained at Horth's trial of honor, which is why Beryl's pregnancies were lasting longer. She also spent more time in the bedroom and less in the nursery this time. Hangst was devastated, and all the Kimstan in attendance shared the depths of his shock. Mother's Nessacs looked grim, but their eyes glittered with triumph because Hara's act had proved them right about the untrustworthiness of non-Eternals. Horth sat through his trial feeling too numb to react. Mother locked herself away in the master bedroom of Black Hearth, where she could insulate herself from non-Eternals. Horth did not see Zrenal either. His oldest brother seemed to have disappeared. Branst came, but Horth did not want to look at Branst too much. He made a point of avoiding eye contact with people he loved. It was Father, as liege of both parties, who declared Horth's actions honorable. 3 Black Hearth errants immediately resigned their posts. Horth knew he had been vindicated of wrongdoing by his liege father. He also knew a trial of honor touching so closely on Black Hearth's honor was important enough to be a vote of confidence over Hank's leadership. Hank's would have been challenged if the errants who resigned had been Kimf Stan, but Horth lacked the will to care as much as he should. He had killed Hara. Whatever came next, the world of his childhood was shattered. The trial broke up in silence, groups disappearing into their respective hearths to discuss the aftermath within their own circles of influence. "Your mother wants to see you," Hanks told Horth. Rock steady and coolly indifferent throughout the trial of honor, Horth's hands suddenly started shaking now that it was done. He stopped at the top of the spiral stairs to stare at them in astonishment. But after a moment, it became clear he could do nothing to stop the reaction, and he continued down the throat to his parents' room. Mother, Father, and Branst were waiting for him at the parlor end of the bedroom. Branst went forward to embrace Horth, and it felt good. Mother stood in the shelter of her husband's arm. "It is over," Hanks was assuring her. "Horth is cleared, no one challenged, and I will never doubt what you fear again, I swear." The promise made Mother's eyes fill with tears. There were no servants or errands in the room, only one of Mother's Nessac retainers. The man served up mugs of warm herbal tea, including one for himself, and they all sat down around the little table Mother used for private get-togethers. "I have sent Zrenel to San Home," said Hangst. Brance shot up out of the chair he had just settled into, crying, "What?" "Sit down," ordered Hangst. Brance shuddered like a struck gong. He stayed on his feet a moment longer, then he dropped into his seat with all the grace of a waxen doll bent at the middle by a child determined to make it join a tea party. Horth wondered fleetingly what had become of Brant's 3 lashes, and concluded that his own debacle over Thriss had prevented Father's sentence from being carried out. Perhaps Branst was hoping good behavior might get him off. Hangst accepted his middle son's obedience with a sigh. Even if the Kim Stan did not challenge, it does not mean they are all content. He covered Mother's hand protectively. There is talk, open talk in some quarters, supporting Hara. Brant's wooden resistance softened with astonishment. "Even though she used childbane, that's Okal." "Not necessarily," said Hangst. "An Okal sin threatens rebirth on a large scale, not a personal one. The point is that Gilean may not be a safe place for Horth, despite the trial of honor, while feelings are still running high." "Horth?" Brant said, surprised. "So why send Zrenel off to San Home?" Mother answered this question. "Your father realized Zrenel needs to deal honorably with his own desires or run the risk of the sort of trouble you two have inspired over women." "Horth will follow Zrenel to San Home," Hanks told them, once the look of protest died away on Brant's expressive features. "I thought of sending Branst as well, but he serves a useful purpose for me through his ties with Green Hearth. And your mother," he told his sons with a weary air of mingled resentment and gratitude, "will not go." Mother gripped Hank's hand, looking at him across the table with a fixated passion that excluded their children for as long as it burned there. "If you die for my sake on the challenge floor," she told her husband, "do not ask me to wait in this life for you to return. I would rather be a waiting soul beside you than your widow in a cruel, corrupting world." Black Hearth held a quiet farewell dinner for Horth. Brance did not attend. Neither did any of the visiting Kim Stan. Instead, the family sat down to dinner with their Sarn and 2 of Mother's Nessac relatives dressed smartly in their fleet uniforms. Mother served them herself. It reminded Horth of the dinner with Keen 7 years before. After dinner, the 6 of them retired to family lounge, at the deep end of the throat. Father held himself aloof, but Beryl chatted eagerly, hungry for news of home. The Nessacs complimented her dinner and her fine son, by which they meant Zrenel. It was she who made a point about citing Horth's virtues, although she also warned them about his verbal limitations. "And you must not forget that Horth is still only 11 years old," she insisted. "No matter how much he looks like a grown man." We understand entirely, Kisk daughter, said Arn, executing a slight but very definite bow. Your youngest will be safe in our hands, said the more light-hearted of the pair, whose name was Hill. He smiled often, with the sort of good-humored charm that inclined Horth to think of him as a Nessac version of Branst, but the emphasis on his oddities embarrassed Horth. The Nessacs called his mother Princess and Kisk daughter, with affectionate reverence, but Horth noticed that they failed to take her seriously somehow. He resolved to prove to them that he was not a child, and that there were more important skills than being able to sustain a conversation. Stay, Horth, Hank said, when people began breaking up to go to bed. Horth remained behind. His father waited until they were alone before he spoke. I have told Zrenel this, Hanks began. I will tell you, too. He gestured. Sit down. Horth sat. Hanks moved his sword aside to sit opposite him. You are going to spend time on San Home, Hanks told Horth. Horth nodded. It is hard to know how much the Nessacs care about the business of reclaiming my soul line for their own, he told his son. Your mother believes it all at face value. Daimon thinks it is a story made up to save face over losing the war. Either way, Horth, what you do regarding children while on San Home is up to you. Hanks indulged in a deep chuckle. I would be a fool to think otherwise, since I could not keep you from Nan's Thriss right under my nose here at court. Behind the laughter, there was both pride and fatherly rebuke for Horth's youthful lack of self-control. Hanks grew sober once more. Whatever you do, Horth, I want you to understand the politics involved. Do you understand what I mean by politics, Horth? Horth shook his head. Hanks sighed. Perhaps I should have let Daimon play a larger part in the education of my sons. He squared his shoulders and tried to make up for that omission. Politics, Horth, is about what people want. So is sword law, but with this difference. In politics, people do not always proclaim the stake they fight over. And they may not be straightforward about how they get it either. Hanks paused a moment, studying his son's face for signs of comprehension. Do you understand? He asked. Horth nodded. God's child, Hanks exclaimed in frustration. Say something to prove it to me, will you? Politics, said Horth, very carefully, are dishonorable. Hank's sober face broke out in a wide smile. That's not a bad start, he said, and laughed with the first sign of real pleasure Horth had detected all evening. Politics are with us always, said Hanks, each and every life, but we also have eternal souls. So remember this, Horth. Your children define your soul's future. You may think that you will have a choice when the time comes, but the soul is like a small child. It seeks life where the call of blood is strongest, or simply where opportunity is offered. Politics should not dictate the life to which your soul may next be drawn. Trust your feelings, Horth. The ones that spring up, wordless from deep inside. They're the only wisdom that survives from one life to another. He looked down at his open, empty hands. Hands that defended his decisions on the challenge floor. I used to fear I erred myself by letting politics dictate I take your mother as my wife. Now, he let his hands fall to his lap. Now I am no longer sure. I think perhaps that Beryl is right. We have known each other before. That we are Sherstan. He smiled ruefully at the confession. Daimon would tell me I'm a fool, but it isn't wrong to be a fool. It is only wrong, in the end, to be dishonorable. Without warning, Hanks decided they were done and stood up. Horth did likewise. Hanks reached for him and hugged him once, firmly. Then he let go. Akrel, Horth, he said. May all your choices be honorable. Akrel, father, said Horth, feeling restored. Where there had been hollowness, he now felt courage. He might not understand politics entirely, but he knew now to trust his own feelings, and to live by the dictates of his honor. Mother was happy and breathless the next morning as she checked through the luggage Horth had packed for himself. You won't need your Nessalian dress jacket, Beryl said, taking that out. You aren't going to stay with strangers. The Sarns will supply you with clothes. Your sword you'll wear, of course, and your new flight leathers." She repacked his shoulder bag, putting aside the long package containing his court clothes. "What else have you sent ahead to the docks?" "Nothing," said Horth. Beryl Nessack straightened up. The dark circles under her eyes were harsh reminders of her recent traumas, but she radiated a girlish glee despite it. "Not a thing more?" Horth had already said as much. He just shrugged. "You were so like your father," exclaimed Beryl. "Zrenel took a couple of trunks worth of stuff." Beryl fell on Horth's neck then, hugged him, kissed him on the cheek, and straightened his hair. Tears glittered in her green eyes. "You are a good boy," she told him. "I know that. But please be on your best behavior at Sarn Haven. And don't take things apart unless you ask first. All right, Horth?" "Yes, Mother." "And be careful if you go on fleet maneuvers. Remember that you still don't have a freedom price, and you are only a child, no matter how grown up you look. And maybe, with regard to that freedom price..." She broke off, looking embarrassed, and fussed with his collar a bit more. "Oh, never mind. It's just, I know they'll take good care of you." She fixed her hand in his vest at chest height and spoke to his sternum, unable to look him in the eyes. "What you did for me, about Hara," Mother said in a voice shaken by too much emotion. "I will never forget that, Horth. Nor must you. All non-eternals are impossible to trust. You must understand that, for your own safety, my true heart. I think perhaps you do. Now." Horth stepped back to look his mother full in the face. He had a warning of his own to impart, and was dreadfully afraid he did not know how. He looked at her pleadingly and said, "Zer Sarn." "Yes?" Mother smiled. Misunderstanding his intention, she supplied information. "He is one of the Sarns. They are very proud of him, and I am grateful that he chose to come, to live with me at Black Hearth. Arn says he might have been a member of the Zer Stan by now, if he'd stayed on San Home." She fussed with horse clothing some more. "I am so glad you'll be living at Sarn Haven. It's where I grew up. And I think you'll like Hill." She laughed. "Arn is less fun, I know. Very strictly brought up. His mother is Zer Sarn's sister, and my aunt." She bit her lip. "Oh dear, Horth, there is so much that you don't know." Horth tried once more. "I trusted Hara," he said slowly. "You trust Zer Sarn." "What do you mean, Horth?" Mother asked, looking spooked. "Are you trying to say that you suspect my uncle of robbing me of children? When that's the very thing he..." "No," Horth said quickly, afraid his attempt to explain himself was doomed to go wrong. "Zer Sarn," he tried once more, desperately, "feels wrong." "Oh." Beryl relaxed. She stroked her son's arm. "It is because he is a Zer, I suppose. A Nessack priest, as people say here at Ava's court. I expect you've heard things about Zers using drugs, just like Laurel's or your father's horrid Gorel pull. But it isn't like that. Nor perhaps," she smiled, "you find it hard to understand how a man could be celibate now that you are grown up." She patted his arm. "On San Home, you will learn about all these things, Horth. You can talk to Zer Hen. He's the family priest at Sarn Haven, and a good, kind man. You might even find a girl who'll help you understand." She stroked his face as she smiled, hope a-quiver in her wide green eyes at the same time as she feared to let him leave her arms. Horth accepted all the possibilities she offered him with a nod. Then he let Mother walk him to the base of the stairs leading up to the plaza, where her Nessack relatives were waiting to escort him to San Home. Hill smiled. "Ready then, Horth?" Horth was ready. He shouldered his kit and remembered to say yes. Hill led and Arn followed. It felt strange to be leaving Black Hearth for what could be the last time in the company of Nessacks. Horth imagined the invisible rebuke of Hara's watching soul, but she had lost her right to influence him when she dropped the shield of honor. He thought of Keen instead, and believed his uncle's soul would approve. House errants cast somber, sullen looks at the three of them as they passed through Black Pavilion. Nobody saluted. Arn acted as if the nobleborns were not there, but their glaring made Hill nervous. Hill's discomfort increased when they emerged onto the plaza and collected even more stares because of their Nessac attire. When his nervousness became too much for him, Hill talked. Arn is a strike force commander. Did you know that, Horth? Hill struck up conversation as they passed through the palace shell onto the promenade that ran the length of the Highborn docks. No, said Horth. He's fought the Red Relish, Hill continued. More than once. Arn caught Hill's eye with an economical gesture and said quietly but firmly, Not here, Hill. Arn was concerned that they might be challenged. Concerned, but not afraid. He would be a difficult opponent to second-guess in a duel, Horth decided. He had a cool, detached confidence, quite different from Hill's charming bravado. The silence that followed left Horth free to watch the people watching them. He saw fear, resentment, curiosity, and dislike. But people knew what to expect from Hill and Arn because they both wore swords, which meant that they respected sword law. They could be trusted that far, and they were here as Blackheart's guests, sheltered by Hank's reputation. Even Black Gate passed them through unmolested. As they got into the car that Hanks had arranged to have waiting for them, Hill asked, Have you ever been in a shake-up, young Horth? Horth wanted to say yes, but he stalled to decide if that was honest. He had flown Rel ships, of course. He had learned to navigate using the apparent motion of distant stars displayed, in false color enhancement on nerve cloth. He knew how to signal other Rel ships across distances too great for light to serve them purpose, by means of a shimmer dance that registered via skim telemetry. He experienced an event or two in space that involved exerting his will against another pilot, but he doubted any of those was significant enough to be counted as a shake-up. So he just shrugged. I have, Hill bragged, against the Red Reach Vrelish. I was 15 the first time. That's not much older than you are. Did you have a freedom price? Horth asked Hill, as Arn guided their car towards a main street and headed for a Nersalian hangar. No, but I had one on the way, said Hill. Now I have 4 children, but I'm 25 now, even if Arn thinks I still act like a teenager. He gave a good-natured laugh. Arn has grandchildren as old as you, Horth. He fought in the Unification War. Unification War? Horth repeated, not familiar with the reference. The war that ended with your parents' marriage, Hill explained to him, as if he were simple. Horth frowned. The Nessac War, he corrected. Is that what you call it? Hill laughed, leaning closer in a friendly manner. We didn't fight it all by ourselves, you know. Arn spoke up from the driver's seat. The conception of unification is hard to understand all at once. It arises from the story of the errors, and for each strayed line of Seveldom, the journey back is different. But this much at least is simple. We are all one blood. Nersalians, Nessacs, and the Highborns of Red Reach, too. Wild souls, said Horth, thinking about Mother's warning that the way back for those with Vrelish blood could be hard. Baron Nessacs taught you a thing or two, I see, Hill said with approval. Zarahen will be glad to know. They rode on in silence. There was a small crowd of Nersalians waiting at the hangar they were headed for. Arn got out first. Hill and Horth followed. The air was crisp with the potential of a challenge. A highborn that Horth did not recognize stepped forward. Well met, said Arn with a nod, and surveyed the other 6 highborns. May our souls mix in death as our blood has in procreation. One of the female Nersalians hawked up bile and spat sideways on the clean metallic floor. Not mine, she said. Keep your blood and damn your souls. Hill shouldered forward. No one asked you, wild one. Arn put his hand on Hill's sword arm. Do you honor sword law? Arn asked calmly. The Nersalian frowned. Of course. Then let us leave, said Arn, or challenge, but do not goad my junior partner into being a fool." There was a short, heavy silence. Then, the Nursalian opposing them gave in with a nod and moved aside. "Take care, liege son," one of the women among them got in, directed at Horth. He returned her smile with a confused expression, distrustful of her qualifications to wish him well. If Mother was correct, she was the sort of soul who faced an even harder fight to regain San Home in her next life than he did. "You'll fly with me," Hill told Horth. "As far as the Red Reach jump, at least. That's where we pick up the rest of Arn's fighter hand before crossing Red Reach to the San Home jump on the other side." Hill took the pilot's seat, and Horth strapped himself into the passenger side of Hill's cockpit. Liftoff went smoothly. Horth watched the readings on the ship's console, which had a strikingly different design from the Nursalian one, but was nonetheless intelligible. The biggest difference was the absence of nerve cloth, because that was made by House Monitum. Hill told Horth that Nessacs lined their hulls with a similar product of priestly manufacture, called Zerskin, that responded to voice commands. "Zers learned to sing to their ships to control them," Hill concluded. "They use pitch, rhythm, and melody to do things you couldn't imagine." Horth was daunted by that idea. He focused on the manual controls instead. "Intrusion field?" Horth asked, pointing to a likely display. He listened with acute attention to Hill's answers. The lesson was temporarily interrupted by the G-forces that pressed them firmly into their acceleration seats as they climbed out of Gillian's gravity, but by the time Hill was ready to start reality skimming, Horth felt he knew the cockpit pretty well. "Here we go," Hill said, as he primed the intrusion field. Horth welcomed the feeling of a tug at his heart and a tiny weight on every cell as the ship's phase splicer engaged. Rel skimming consisted of a series of rapid phase transitions that reduced existence to a stutter punctuated by swallows of gap. Pilots tried to describe gap in all kinds of ways, from equating it to memories you had forgotten to talking about dimensions lacking space and time. Horth understood it, without fuss or even superstitious dread, as the place where souls waited and watched from after they died. It lurked beyond his powers of perception and attempted to seduce him with its cold allure. But it bothered Horth no more than the risk of a steep fall intimidated residents of Spiral Hall. Gap was simply the spiritual dimension of the risk he accepted to cross the vast and lifeless expanses of the universe. "Mind you," Hill was saying, "it isn't as if we don't appreciate Empire products when they can be had. A ship taken in the war, for example. We don't trust things the Monatees are willing to sell to us. Their Salians are different. We trust your honor. And you'd be surprised to see what people will sell to relatives, even if they have been enemies in the past. No one casts better hull steel than Nursalians." Horth found Hill's endorsement of Nursalian engineering pleasing. But that work was nearly all done by petty Sevelites or even commoners, because they had greater tolerance for low gravity than highborns. Horth wanted to point out to Hill how the very superiority of Nursalian hull steel depended on valuing commoners, but he did not want to risk upsetting the companionable feeling that resonated between himself and Hill like a low-intensity version of what pilots called soul touch. Hill felt it too, and because he put everything into words, he began reviewing the connections between House Nursal and House Nessac, repeating stories of a mingled lineage that were carried into Horth's awareness by Hill's easy shared affection like a payload. It was not long, however, before Horth became aware of an old problem that had ended his companionable flights with Zrenal as he grew up. Some instinctive part of him wanted to take over from the Nessac. There was no animosity about it. Horth simply had a hard time keeping his pilot's grip politely in check. Zrenal had lectured Horth on the rudeness of that impulse, reminding him not to encroach by giving him hard thumps on the chest, followed by a brotherly admonishment to stop fencing me, Rejact. At first, Horth had not understood what Zrenal meant, because neither of them were holding swords. But he soon figured out that a battle of wills under Skim could be equally serious. A Rel ship's controls governed its drive and direction, but it took grip to resist gap. Without it, a ship failed to manifest between one fraction of a second and the next. Instead, it slipped forward in time by absorbing time debt that was redistributed through the gap dimensions. It was easier to assert your grip if you had the controls, but anyone flying at exactly the same mix and vector, which included any passengers, could vie for dominance. Horth did not want to embarrass himself by interfering with Hill's piloting, of course, but the longer they flew, the harder it got. "Nearly there," Hill said finally, after an increasingly trying hour in which he had slowly fallen silent. Horth shared Hill's relief. His hard-to-locate sense of grip felt like an overstimulated muscle, aching to act. When they cut out of skim, Hill exhaled in a forced sigh, wiping his brow with the back of his leather sleeve. "Sans ghost," Hill exclaimed, reaching over to give Horth a friendly shove. "You make bad cargo." Horth was busy feeling nauseous because they were coasting under zero-G conditions. He kept his teeth locked. Hill had the same problem, to a lesser degree, and began to cat-claw, a method of sipping just enough power from the fabric of the universe for a comfortable 1G thrust in real space without getting wardships excited. Cat-clawing was preferred over the use of other propulsion methods because REL ships had little room for storing fuel, and even if they did, spewing out gases would pollute the hard vacuum needed for space lanes. Their destination was a station near the Red Reach jump. Hill docked at its rim and showed Horth to a berth where his own REL fighter was waiting for him. Like all REL fighters, Horth's was spherical, with a rotational inner frame that braced the sling cockpit. The frame was locked down in dock. Once under skim, it floated in an energy field that enabled it to rotate relative to the outer hull. The nerve cloth lining the inner hull was a dull gray in dock. Only under skim conditions would it light up with enhanced images of REL ships detected via skim telemetry, interspersed with coded warnings representing mass. The ship was a gift from Father, and Horth was proud to fly it as an honorary member of Arn's battle hand. After clearing the station, they took the jump one by one. Horth had made this jump before with his family, and was able to do it on his own with the aid of a mental mantra that encoded the trick of survival for him. Jump visions were different for different people. Horth's vision for the Red Reach jump echoed his memories of a forest fire he had witnessed in childhood on Tark. Horth remembered sitting in Mother's lap, in an atmospheric plane, feeling safe but curious as he looked out the window at the licking flames and the thick smoke. Mother told him the fire was like Red Reach, and the souls trapped in Vrelish bodies were like the trees they saw below them, being consumed. It was comforting to get out of the jump, and exciting to face a trek across Red Reach, where Vrelish pirates came from. Horth didn't know a lot about such pirates, except that they were without honor and plagued the space lanes in Killing Reach, where Liege Brillet ruled over a small nation of domed cities on rocky worlds and deep space habitats. He expected Red Reach itself to be swarming with pirates. In fact, they did not encounter any trouble on their way across the Reach to the jump that would get them to Sanhome. Any stations they approached merely sent out their ward ships to make sure they kept going, which was exactly what Nersalian stations would have done. Horth was mildly disappointed by the untimely determination of the Vrelish to prove perfectly civilized.